are moments away from some big-time news in high school and college football.
The people want to know.
Where will you be going to college?
I'll be taking my talents, go to Hogs.
I'll be taking University of Auburn.
Nolan Rucci says on Wisconsin.
National Signing Day. It's a momentous day on the calendar for every college football program.
What makes this kid so special?
To put it simply, ball skills.
I'll be taking my talents to the University of Alabama.
The best players in high school football will make one of the biggest decisions that will forever change their future.
Felt like home. There's no place like it.
It's a dream come true.
I am honored and blessed to say University of Notre Dame.
The premier players in the country will make their intentions known. It's a day where recruits put pen to paper, paper to facts.
It was just a great decision for me to go there.
The traditional recruiting powerhouses will continue stockpiling elite talent, but will there be any last-minute changes of heart? You don't have to look far back to see the impact top recruits can have.
This kid is special. They come around once in a blue moon, these kind of quarterbacks. That's how good Trevor Lawrence is.
The moment these athletes have worked their entire lives for has arrived.
You're being recruited by 5 very good football programs. How tough has this decision been for you?
The race towards the top signing class starts right now.
You're getting a winner.
This kid is a beast.
We'll make his announcement live.
It's National Signing Day.
And welcome in. We are live. It is National Signing Day alongside Steve Wiltfong. We got Trey Scott in the house. We've got a lot of announcements coming your way. We've got live commitments coming your way this morning. We're going to talk to head coaches, and we're going to bring you everything wall to wall for the next 3 hours that you need to know as we finally wrap up the college football season. Steve Wiltfong, I'm going to start with you because we've got a commitment coming up from Avonte Dickerson in about 10 minutes. We're going to get it going pretty quickly. General thoughts as we head into the morning, as things, as we understand, will evolve as we go on.
Well, we've already had breaking news, Josh. It's Spatula Season Part 2. Michigan flips top 247 defensive tackle Rajon Benny from rival Michigan State. He had committed to the Spartans during the fall, not long after Michigan State was able to beat Michigan on the field, but Michigan hangs in there, led by Sharon Moore's efforts. He's a top 5 recruiter nationally on 247 Sports now. And with Rajon Benny in the fold for Michigan, Michigan moves to number 10 in the 247 Sports composite team recruiting rankings. And 2 big gets for them at defensive tackle here at the end of this cycle with Rajon Benny and George Rooks coming into Mike McDonald's Ravens defense. Defensive tackle was the big remaining need for them, and the Wolverines hit big here.
And so as we enter the morning, Trey, I mean, we're going to talk about this a lot as we go on, but Michigan is, as Steve just mentioned, they've cracked the top 10. We're looking at Bama in a familiar pole position. General thoughts, I mean, sometimes we see a ton of movement on signing day, sometimes we don't. How do the class rankings look as we crank up the morning?
To be honest, Josh, number 1 is where I'm looking at. Alabama is about to have 7 of the 10 best recruiting classes ever. They're going to finish the day with the number 1 class as long as they sign Kamar Wheaton. As far as everything else goes, Steve, I was expecting a good day for A&M. I don't know if they're going to get all the guys we thought they would. I thought they might jump from 7 to 5.
Yeah, A&M tracking for a 3rd straight top 10 recruiting class under Jimbo Fisher and his staff, and trying to get in the top 5 for a 2nd time in 3 years. Still expecting some fireworks for A&M today. L.J. Johnson, the number 3 running back in this class, is announcing this morning between Texas and Texas A&M. Love the Aggies there. Top 247 receiver Brian Thomas is another top 100 recruit they're in on. Yesterday, Billy Embody had the report that Brian Thomas is not expected to sign today. They're battling LSU for him, maybe Alabama in there as well. And then top 100 defensive lineman Tywan Malone announcing today. When I went to bed last night, I thought Ole Miss was in the driver's seat. Still no official word there, but I like the Rebels with the Aggies rounding out the top 2.
Tywan Malone's a guy, I mean, we talk a lot about multi-sport athletes. A lot of these guys are the 1%ers, and so a lot of them can play multi-sport. But I heard you talk about Malone before. And the comparison you give from the baseball perspective is that of Columbus native Frank Thomas.
Yeah, when you see him in the batting cage, he's got that plus power that college football or college baseball programs are coveting. But I still think his long-term projection is on the NFL side, and his ranking justifies that for us as one of the more unique 2-sport athletes in this class, and why he was so coveted down the stretch.
It's obviously been well chronicled. I don't know if you guys have heard, but it's been a COVID year, as people are calling it at this point. And so visit season was out of whack, Steve, official and unofficial, all out of whack. Coaches couldn't get out on the road. And so when we were sitting here back in March, April, May, and you and I were doing the whip around, we were talking about how Alabama only had 1 verbal commitment at that time, and Tennessee had loaded up, and everyone wondered, well, when we get to signing day, both early and late signing day, are the top rankings going to look way radically different than they normally do? And yet I'm scrolling and I see Bama, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Clemson, 1 through 5. If you were to have just dropped in on planet Earth right this moment and we look at the top 10 as we're showing you right now on screen, that doesn't really look like anything all that crazy's happened.
Yeah, well, pandemic recruiting favors these teams for various reasons. When you look at Alabama, and when you're recruiting against Alabama, you probably need a young man to come visit your campus multiple times and get caught up in your atmosphere and what you're doing, because if it's just Zoom sessions and virtual visits, Alabama's got a stacked deck. When you saw the video of Nick Saban talking to Eni White, the 5-star defensive lineman from Pennsylvania that popped up on Instagram, when you're recruiting against that pitch and you can't get a young man to your campus to fall in love with your atmosphere or a big rivalry win, that's tough sledding. Ohio State and Georgia, Kirby Smart and Ryan Day, those are two of the hardest working head coach recruiters in the country. Same with Ed Orgeron and Mario Cristobal there at number 6. And then Clemson, that's a similar setup to Alabama, with Dabo Swinney being able to be charming with recruits and their families and their product. Pandemic recruiting really favored those schools, and that's why you see Alabama right now with not just the #1 class, but tracking for the #1 class of all time.
Let's actually expand outside the top 10 as we await Avonte Dickerson's live commitment in just a matter of moments now. We've got the top 10 there. We'll look at it throughout the day, but 11 through 20 bookended by Oklahoma and then Nebraska there. And Steve, I know we don't talk maybe a lot about the Huskers, but top 20 class here. I know Ole Miss sits there at 19. We've talked a lot, and we will as the show progresses this morning, about teams that are in position of maybe being an overachiever in these rankings, maybe some programs underachieving relative to where you would think they're ranked. I mean, I got to think that 19 and 20 spot reflects that.
Yeah, well, Nebraska, this is a 3rd or 4th or 5th straight top 25 class for them, so they're recruiting at the level we're used to. Maryland, that Maryland class is tied for their best finish in 247 Sports history, which goes back to 2010. And believe it or not, Wisconsin has never had a top 25 class in 247 Sports history. So pandemic recruiting going well for the Badgers. North Carolina, man, the way they're building that thing up right now, number 13 last year, number 14 right now, and looking for some good news today with top 247 cornerback, defensive back Dante Balfour. The Tar Heels are looking like a ACC contender for years to come.
As we keep these rankings rolling, I mean, it really gets interesting in this 20 to 30 range, Steve. I'm looking at Iowa, I'm looking at Arkansas, and I'm not all that shocked. Penn State, maybe still some moves to make today. How about Pittsburgh at number 23? If that position even comes close to holding, how historic are we talking about for this class for Pat Narduzzi?
Well, again, this is the top class that Pitt's ever signed in 247 Sports history. They've never finished in the top 25, and for them, it was all about home cooking and getting back into the Whipple League and winning guys like Elliott Donald. They really struggled with some of the top guys from the local parts, and in this class that was not the case, and the Panthers hitting big at home, propelling them into the top 25.
And Trey, also, before we scroll here, Florida State sits at number 30, and I know there's got to be a lot of context provided there because there's been a pretty radical approach given the transfer portal era and the way that Mike Norvell and the Seminoles have chose to go about this entire cycle, really.
I was just looking at it, Josh. 8 transfers in this class. That includes Mackenzie Milton. When you look at 30 like that, to me, that's disappointing for a second-year coach. Last year was like 22. I think they're going to jump to 22 if they get Destin Hill, the receiver. But it's clear the year 1 coaches in a pandemic, it was year 0. You're not seeing a good class from them. They're having to fill on the transfer portal. I think Mackenzie Milton, UCF transfer, like he'll be their guy this fall. And I think it's important to plug holes that way. DJ Williams, a running back from Auburn. But Steve, like South Carolina is doing the same thing with Shane Beamer and these coaches who aren't quite crushing on the recruiting trail are doing it in the transfer portal. We're going to see if it works.
Well, I don't know if the championship recipe is from the portal, but it can certainly get your program jump-started and maybe get you into a winning column season in a bowl game. But the recipe is still going to be building your program through recruiting, having a strong foundation and culture, and then maybe sprinkling in a Landon Dickerson if you need some depth on the offensive line or some help in your receiver room or your running back room like Trey Sermon in Ohio State.
And so, again, we'll scroll through these throughout the day. There quickly you see 31 through 40. Again, we've got many live commitments coming up, 3 in particular, and 1 just moments away. Avonte Dickerson, big-time 4-star corner. He's out of Omaha, Nebraska. Oregon among the listed finalists. They are the crystal ball favorite heading into this morning. Let's get you ready for the commitment of Avonte Dickerson.
Avonte Dickerson, one of the top remaining uncommitted cornerbacks in the country. Really like the way he plays. He's quick, athletic. Speed is his game. One of the fastest cornerbacks in the country. A 10'9", 700-meter guy, a track guy. Like the way his game translates.
4-year starter at Westside High in Omaha, Nebraska. He went out as a senior, a state champion, the program's first in school history. They don't win it without Dickerson, who filled the box score on offense, defense, and special teams. As a receiver, a running back, 4 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries. Dickerson is a game changer in any capacity when he steps between the lines. Oregon, Minnesota, Nebraska are the finalists. A player that can erase those dynamic slots and all-purpose backs we see exploding across the landscape of college football.
And we're taking it now live to Omaha, Nebraska. That is where Avonte Dickerson is standing by. Avonte, first off, great to see you this morning, my man. Let me ask you, before we get to your commitment, just quickly, take me through what this process has been like. You guys, as a class, have been through something that no other recruiting class has been through. What has this been like?
It's been stressful with COVID and everything, with canceling visits, and the only thing you can do is talk to coaches on FaceTime. So you have to build a relationship through the phone and not through in person. So it's kind of hard.
We've looked at your list of finalists. We've talked to you. We've seen the film. We've done all the talking. Take me through, before we get the commitment, what went into your final decision, and when did you know this decision was right for you?
I just wanted to take my time, because I see all these other guys committing early and everything, but some people have to take their time, and that's what I had to do with this process.
Avonte Dickerson, the floor is yours. Let's hear that commitment.
At first, I want to thank my mom. I want to thank my coaches, my teammates for these wonderful 4 years. I'd like to thank Mike for being the best trainer I ever had. I would just like to thank everyone in this room for just coming here and just watching me. So I would be taking my talents to the University of Oregon.
So there you have it. Avonte Dickerson headed to the University of Oregon. He's got the shirt. He's got the hat. There is no live duck on set. Disappointed though I may be, we press on here. So Avonte, I think you can hear me now. I think the applause has died down. Oregon, very hot program on the West Coast. Mario Cristobal has putting together another dynamite recruiting class. You become a part of that class. Tell me, why Oregon?
It's just Coach Chance, Coach Cristobal. They're just wonderful guys, and Coach Cristobal always speaks about being physical, and that's what I like doing. Like, I like competing, so I'm gonna go to the Pac-12 and compete and just. But at first, I just want to give a shout out to Minnesota for supporting me through this whole process when they didn't even have to. So I give a shout out to them.
Avonte, during this pandemic, prospects weren't able to take traditional visits, but you were still able to go out to Oregon recently on your own. What is a prospect in your position? What were you able to take away from that visit, and how did that help Oregon secure your signature today?
I mean, all you got to do is just, you can't go inside the football facility. You can't really do anything that you get for an official visit. So all you got to do is look around and everything, and if that feels like home to you, which Oregon did, so that feels like home.
Avonte, there are a lot of kids right now in the 2022-2023 class. So I'm going to let you do some of Coach Cristobal's work for him. If you're looking down the road and you're talking to future prospects, sell them on Oregon. Tell them what you experienced and why they should make that choice.
If you want to compete and you want to be physical, you want to be on a winning team, then come play for Oregon.
Avonte Dickerson headed to the University of Oregon. My man, congratulations. Have a great rest of your day. We're proud of you.
Thank you.
So, Steve, there you go. We expected that. That's where we thought Avonte Dickerson would go. Another crystal ball validates. And right now, we're looking at these top 10 corner rankings. Avonte Dickerson parked squarely there. He's not that only yellow and green O that we see on that board, so a really good haul here for Mario Cristobal and the Ducks.
Yeah, I think that Dickerson's commitment locks up Oregon's position in the Pac-12, #1 for a third straight year for the two-time defending Pac-12 champs on the field, #6 nationally. This is a class that keeps them pushing for that college football playoff.
And we're going to get Brandon Huffman in here momentarily. I just want to overall talk about that, though, Steve. I mean, we're looking at a top 10 in the class rankings, littered with SEC, and we've got some Big Ten flavor in there. Clemson representing the ACC. And yet there's Oregon at number 6. There's Southern Cal at number 8. And those are two pivotal programs when we're talking about the current plight of the Pac-12 as a conference. Everyone puts the spotlight on Eugene and LA. You guys got to get it done. You guys got to be the lead dogs. And I mean, at least today on signing day, they're holding up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, and for Oregon, you look at the way they recruited the offensive line led by Kingsley Suamatea. This is one of the best offensive line hauls in the country. They get their franchise quarterback in Ty Thompson, a state champion out of the state of Arizona, and it's a loaded receiver class too, led by Troy Franklin out of the state of California. And for USC, it's about keeping the elite guys home, and that starts with Corey Foreman. Hopefully they, in their eyes, they add Rajon Davis today, who's one of the more unique linebackers, kind of in that Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoah mold out of Notre Dame, who won the Buckets this year. But USC really stacked their class defensively, which was big for them. Jay Toya, one of the best defensive linemen out west, and Julian Simon, one of the best linebacker prospects, and of course Corey Foreman, one of the elite pass rushers this cycle. Both those programs elevated their national profile and their roster with these classes.
Brandon Huffman, bring him in. Guy knows the West Coast as well as anyone. Brandon, you followed this recruitment for quite a while. Avonte Dickerson, it is official now. He's headed to Oregon. So let's get your immediate reaction on that commitment.
Well, obviously, it's a big pickup for Oregon. And again, it's showing what a national brand that they continue to be really over the last decade. Their ability to go into specific states on the West Coast has been well noted, going into Utah, going into Arizona, and to California like we've done the last couple of years. But really, it's been the impressive thing is how they've gone into other states outside the Pac-12 footprint to be able to flip guys late, to be able to land guys over maybe recruitments that never seemed like they were destined for Oregon. So I think Mario Cristobal and his staff have shown that they're going to go all throughout the country and try to bring those guys to Oregon. You got to give an assist to that entire assistant coaching staff. Don Johnson, his new director of player personnel, has been working the phones, but Cristobal and his staff have done a fantastic job over the last 3 years of really going into places that you never really thought Oregon would go into and landed those players who have become impact players for the Ducks.
Brandon, just kind of talk about Mario Cristobal and what you think makes him such an elite head coach recruiter.
Well, I think it's his energy. I mean, first and foremost, this is a guy who's got more energy than you're going to find with most head coaches. Obviously, he's an offensive lineman at the heart. So, he's a guy that knows that he's going to have to bring it all the time, no matter what. The first quarter of recruitment, the fourth quarter of recruitment, he's got that energy. But it also is what trickles down to the guys on his staff, whether it's assistant coaches, whether it's guys that are in player personnel, guys that are directors of recruiting. Everybody that's a part of that Oregon staff has to do their part to bring these guys to Oregon. And I think what they really did well is that they adapted. When the pandemic knocked out all of the spring recruiting, Oregon had their junior day the weekend before. Now, nobody predicted the pandemic, but they had that junior day scheduled that second weekend in March, right before everything happened. In fact, Ty Thompson, who signed with them, the quarterback out of Arizona, was on campus when the NCAA was making its decision. So Oregon got ahead of things by having that junior day. And then when they were unable to bring guys to campus the rest of spring, they adapted with Zooms, with virtual tours. So they're a staff and a program, and it comes from the top down of being able to adjust no matter what the circumstances are. And it's almost like you saw Oregon's recruiting class get better and stronger as the pandemic took more opportunities away from them to bring guys to campus. They actually did a better job of anybody out west. And it's evident in this class with an elite class that they were prepared for any kind of obstacle thrown their way, and that's because the efforts of Mario Cristobal trickles down to every member of his staff that says we've got to recruit with the same energy that our head coach does.
Brandon, whether it's right or wrong, when you talk to staffs in the South, when you talk to staffs in the Midwest about the West Coast, once upon a time it was just USC and everyone else, but now a lot of focus has been placed on that coaching staff and program that you just detailed so thoroughly in Eugene, Oregon. And when you look at their commitment list, you mentioned all these different states represented, all four corners of the country. Do you feel, and is the feel on the West Coast, that the build of that Oregon program is one that could potentially start to transcend just conference and end up becoming one of those true national year-in, year-out contenders?
Yeah, I mean, it's not been a great 7-year run for the Pac-12 when it comes to the college football playoff. But remember, the first year that there was a college football playoff, one of the national championship game participants was Oregon. There has not been a Pac-12 team back in the championship game since then. There's only been one playoff team since that 2014 season. So Oregon kind of already is ahead of that curve anyway, in the fact that they've been the only one who has actually played for a national championship. The second time they played for a national championship during the past decade. So yes, I think there has been this expectation that Oregon is going to continue to compete for national championships. But you're right. The perception is if SC is not the one that's competing for it, then the Pac-12 is down. I think Oregon, I think Washington, both having been playoff teams over the last 5 to 7 years, and then also being teams that have played in multiple New Year's Six bowl games over the last years, have shown that it's more than just USC. But I still think that it's going to take a Pac-12 team winning a national championship outside of Southern Cal for them to take, for the nation to take the Pac-12 serious. But I think Oregon has positioned themselves, at least over the last few years, to be that team that's got the best chance to contend for a national title.
Brandon, we got head coach Ryan Day joining us in about 15 minutes, and he's in deep with the top-rated uncommitted prospect in the country from your neck of the woods, JT Tuimoloau. What's your sense of that recruitment right now as he's taking his time and going to take this to at least April?
Well, I think that, like you said, he's going to take it to at least April, so we still have a couple of months to kind of let that recruitment marinate. It's still a final five, not a top five. He came on the CBS Signing Day show, 247 back on the early signing period, named that final five of Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, USC, and Washington. There seems to have been kind of two different camps that have been going on in that recruitment. The two national programs that played for the national title, Alabama and Ohio State, and then the three Pac-12 schools with Oregon, USC, and Washington. Washington obviously has the hometown advantage. USC is where much of his family is from, down in Southern California. Oregon has done a tremendous job of recruiting him. Then you have Alabama and Ohio State, and there still seems to be a lot of buzz trending towards the Buckeyes with the Tide right behind him. The only school of those final five he's never visited is Ohio State, and that's part of the reason he's trying to wait until at least the middle to late part of April, is so he has an opportunity to get out to Columbus. Perhaps the dead period will turn into the quiet period, and it will allow for him to come on campus at Ohio State at the end of April. Maybe he goes out there on his own dime in the meantime. But right now, Alabama and Ohio State still are out in front. But keep an eye on the Ducks, as they did with Kayvon Thibodeau a few years ago, Justin Flo last year. They have closed well with the West's top defensive player, and they are trying like crazy to get JT. Can they close the gap? Can the Huskies or the Trojans close that gap with Bama and Ohio State? I still have my crystal ball on Ohio State, but it's going to be a fascinating next 2 months with JT.
Brandon Huffman, awesome stuff, brother. Go get yourself a bagel, put some cream cheese on it. Have a great rest of your morning. I know you guys are just getting cranked up. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, fellas.
All right, so he just talked a lot about JTT. We'll talk about him more coming up. But also, Steve, we've got several players that are still uncommitted. And so, you know, you kind of come into the morning, it's like the NL draft or the NFL draft, like top available players. We've got top uncommitted prospects. That was one. Avonte Dickerson comes off the board. We've got Davon Townley, his live commitment coming up. We've got Rajon Davis, his live commitment coming up. But outside of the names that we've already mentioned, what are some guys that, or who are some guys rather, that we're looking at right now?
Well, top 247 linebacker Trevin Wallace. He's the number 2 inside linebacker in the country in the top 247. He's announcing later today between Auburn, Kentucky, and Ole Miss. And I like the Wildcats there. Auburn was the team to beat going into the early signing period. But some coaching shakeup there on the Plains opened the door for Kentucky, and I think they came storming right through. Michigan, they had another flip. Spatula season continuing in Ann Arbor. They flipped Ike Chukwu Iwana from Kamar Wheaton's high school there, Lakeview Centennial down there in Texas. He was a Colorado commit. He's signing with Michigan, and as we said at the top of the show, Michigan flipping to that Baltimore Ravens-style defense under new defensive coordinator Mike McDonald. Defensive tackle was a big need for the Wolverines down the stretch. They've landed 3 since he's been on campus. There's a lot of good energy in Ann Arbor right now. They have the number 10 recruiting class in the country right now, and Iwana, who's extremely strong, a multi-sport standout, is the latest to join the fold.
And a reminder, Ohio State head coach Ryan Day coming up in a matter of moments here with us on the 247 Sports National Signing Day show. I want to kick it back just a second to Texas A&M because we entered the morning, Steve. It's only like 20 or 30 minutes ago, but we entered the morning. We were talking about teams potentially with the most to gain. And the Aggies, if we've listened to the 247 Sports Recruiting podcast on Monday, or we've read the primer on 247sports.com, plug. The Aggies have been a consistent theme there. What could happen if everything goes right for Jimbo Fisher?
Well, they could land 3 more top 100 recruits to a class that started the day number 7 nationally, trying to get into a top 5 for the second time in 3 years, a 3rd straight top 10 class on the way. LJ Johnson is the one that I think they have a great chance to land, the number 3 running back in the country. They're in the final 2, in my opinion, for top 2 for defensive tackle Tywan Malone alongside Ole Miss. When I went to bed last night, I thought Ole Miss still had the edge there, but that's been a back and forth throughout the end of the process here. And then Brian Thomas, a top 247 receiver from the state of Louisiana. At one point, this looked like an A&M Alabama battle. Now it's an A&M LSU battle. And our LSU site, Billy Embody, reported yesterday that he doesn't expect Brian Thomas to sign. And in addition to those 3 guys, Texas A&M has the number 1 ranked JUCO offensive tackle and play, Jordan Moko. He's in Australia. He's from Australia. He's not announcing till Friday at I think 6 o'clock, which is maybe 1 o'clock our time. Don't ask me for that, but I like A&M's chances for Jordan Moko and LJ Johnson, and we'll see what happens with the other 2.
Again, Ohio State coach Ryan Day coming up in a matter of moments. So, Trey, I'm looking at the top 5 here, and Steve, you can weigh in on this too. LSU, it was not a banner year on the field. There was a mess off the field. There's really no skill in this room, I guess, in predicting what happens there. But as it relates to predicting how this class is going to wrap up, Ed Orgeron and company sitting there top 5, probably going to have a couple of spots left free for the transfer portal. So, again, if you didn't know last year happened, then you would look at the top 5 and say things seem to be business as usual in Baton Rouge.
I'm a prisoner of the moment. So when LSU was struggling at points this fall, there was a lot of noise. I thought this could kind of be the beginning of the end for Coach O. They saved their face with a really good recruiting class. Like I think that's pretty clear. The transfer portal has been sort of weird. It was strange to lose Eric Gilbert. There's rumblings that other guys are unhappy, but regardless, to sign this class, I'm pretty bullish on LSU this fall. I think Miles Brennan's going to be a good player for them. I like the receivers they have. I think they're going to be better defensively only because they have to be. Steve, you know, LSU wins the title in 2019. You would expect for them to have a top 5 class, so I'm not going to give them like too much love for that. But considering all they had going on, I think it is still noteworthy.
Well, it's a 3rd straight top 5 class for LSU as it stands right now. And when you lose 14 players to the NFL draft and you have those opt-outs that they had, it's going to be tough sledding, especially when you don't have a spring football and a summer camp and you have new coordinators at LSU. It was an uphill climb already, and it was a tough season, but they get the big win at Florida to end the year, and then they flip guys like Armani Goodwin from Auburn. They have a terrific running back class with him and Corey Kiner, who's still racking up yards out of the state of Ohio. They win a slobber knocker with Alabama for coveted in-state safety Sage Ryan, and they flip Demarius McGee, who I think is one of the top corners in this class from Tennessee. And so, as Trey said, this is a really good class for LSU, and they should be right back where we're used to seeing them coming here this fall.
When we were talking in the spring, every time we did a Wiltfong Whip Around, which is weekly on this YouTube channel, if you're watching on YouTube, we were talking about Ohio State, and they were already setting up an historic class. And it is a very, very good class. Buckeyes currently sitting number 2. We're going to be joined by Ryan Day in a couple of minutes. But before that, Steve, when I'm looking at this class for Ohio State, they have dipped heavily into areas anywhere from the Atlantic coast down into Texas. And so they've held their own in-state as usual, but they go into these strongholds, and this looks like a vintage Ohio State signing class.
Well, they have 4 players in our top 247 player rankings in the top 10 already committed with a chance to get JT, so that would be half the top 10. This is a class that maybe helps Ohio State get over the hump from being that annual playoff contender to now they can go out and win a national championship. Jack Sawyer, he's that elite pass rusher in the mold of the Bosas and Chase Young, and this offensive line class is terrific, led by Donovan Jackson, who this is a fantastic offensive line year, and Donovan Jackson may have the best film of them all. And man, we have Travion Henderson ranked as the number 10 player in the country overall. He's our number 1 running back. He may be too low. I wish he would have played his senior year. He had the best junior film of any player in the country at any position. He would have been a top 50 safety safety recruit in my mind, and he's a guy that I think will be an instant star in Columbus for the Buckeyes.
And we also have JT Tuimoloau, who is not going to make a decision today, going to push it to April probably. Ohio State thought to be the leader at the moment for him. I remember on the early signing date, we spoke with Emeka Egbuka, for example, #1 overall receiver in the Buckeyes class, #1 overall in the country right now. I mean, think about how seamlessly Ohio State just went into the state of Washington and pulled him out. That's a big deal.
Well, as we said at the top of the show, pandemic recruiting, it's going to favor a program like Ohio State, whose coaching staff from top to bottom does such a terrific job of fostering relationships, genuine relationships. Emeka Egbuka, recruited by Brian Hartline, who is the reigning 247 Sports National Recruiter of the Year coming into this cycle, signing that tremendous receiver class last year, then comes in this year and gets Emeka Egbuka. But you can't recruit like this. You can't you can't win Travion Henderson on one coast and Emeka Egbuka on another, and go down to Texas and beat Stanford for Donovan Jackson if it's not about relationships and making kids feel comfortable with your program and the people around it. And Ohio State will tell you their players do the best job of recruiting for them, but their coaching staff, man, they just do a great job of being consistent with genuine relationships, and Ryan Day works as hard at it as anybody, and you see the results with these classes year in and year out, and they have arguably the best player in the country at several different positions in the fold already.
And what's amazing is we just saw him play Alabama in the national championship game. They come up short there. We're looking at this class, how incredible it is relative to the rest of the Big Ten, and yet they've got to have a truly national approach there, because as great as it may be compared to the teams they're going to play in conference, I mean, they're fighting tooth and nail with broken glass for every one of these guys, because they know this is the kind of roster. These are the kind of classes they got to stack on top of each other to even be competitive in those championship and playoff type settings.
Sure, but it does start with home cooking for Ohio State, and Jack Sawyer's the first commit in their class. They're winning the guys in their region that they should, going into St. Louis and getting the coveted guys that they want, guys that are in driving distance, going into the DMV. That's always been important to Ohio State. Place that's produced the likes of Chase Young. They get Travion Henderson out of there this year. And then, yes, you go national and you win those blue chip battles like Emeka Egbuka and Donovan Jackson. They have the recipe, and they get those ingredients in the bowl, Josh, and it seems to come out of the oven tasting sweet each year.
I mean, as much as we're talking about the 2021 class, it is 2021 signing day. We're already listening to names like Quinn Ewers and all this excitement about having a top quarterback already in the fold for the next cycle. I'm going to make you a bold prediction here, Steve Wilfong. Slap it out of the air if it's wrong. I don't think Ohio State's really going anywhere. I think we're going to be talking about him this time next year. Same spot.
I mean, let's see if they can make a run at this Alabama class this year that's finishing #1 nationally. When you already look at Ohio State next year, they have 3 5-stars committed. Quinn Ewers, the #1 quarterback in the country, #1 overall player. Jaheim Singletary, one of the fine corners in that 2022 class, a 5-star for sure. And Caleb Burton, our #1 ranked receiver. So they're off and running and winning at home with guys like Gabe Powers and C.J. Hicks, like I said, and going national for guys like Quinn Ewers and Caleb Burton.
Trey, when we are in editorial meetings every week and we're talking about formulating content or we're talking about recruiting rankings, it used to be that we would talk about Ohio State within the context of, all right, where's Michigan at? Where's Penn State? And it's not that we don't still do that, but the first words out of anyone's mouth now, it sounds like are Ohio State and, all right, how does that compare to Clemson? How does that compare to Alabama? And I know there are a lot of detractors to the overall national, top-heavy approach that the sport has taken, but yet reality is reality. I mean, I got to be honest, like you and I have probably spoken about Ohio State within the context of Bama more in the past couple of months than we have Michigan, Penn State. It's just kind of the way the conversation's changed.
Steve would be better at knowing this, but do they even recruit against Michigan? Like, they just take who they want, and it's crazy. I thought it might kind of die down a little bit when Urban Meyer left, and Ryan Day's first transition class was like 14th. It's truly insane. They have 6 top 50 players in the class of 2022. I remember this time last year they were starting off 2021 so hot too. It's you recruit like this. Georgia does it, Bama does it, Clemson does it, LSU does it. You're gonna win. You're gonna win national titles. It's just inevitable.
I feel like we've seen more head-to-heads for Ohio State. They're recruiting against Oklahoma and Clemson. That's kind of the bucket that they're in recruiting, and they're winning those fair share. Guys, a little breaking news there. Trevin Wallace, the #2 linebacker in the top 247, number 35 player overall. He's going to Kentucky. This is a young man that rushed for 386 yards in his last high school football game. They lost, a playoff game, played every snap on defense, returned kicks and punts. A guy that Gabe Brooks compares to Patrick Queen, who was drafted in the first round out of LSU. He's headed to Kentucky, a guy we thought was going to go to Auburn in the early signing period, headed to play for Mark Stoops.
Yeah, that's how it happens on National Signing Day. It's why when I wake up in the morning and people talk about how they have everything figured out, no, you don't. You don't because the coaching staffs don't. And so if they don't, we don't, you don't. We're talking about Trevin Wallace there, and we're going to have Ryan Day in just a couple of minutes, so we'll circle back around. But, I mean, just really quickly, that's an inside linebacker, 4-star, as Steve said, out of Wayne County in my home state of Georgia. Auburn, as you mentioned, was thought to be the prime player. Early signing period comes and goes, and now that you see Trevin Wallace, a huge pickup for Coach Stoops and company going out of state, going down into the Peach State and bringing him in. We'll talk about the whole lot more later because we've got obviously still about 2.5 hours to go this morning. But I want to kick it right back to our Ohio State conversation. We're going to go to Columbus, Ohio, and we're going to welcome in Buckeyes head coach Ryan Day. And Coach Day, I mean, we've been talking about your class for about the past 5 minutes now, and we've been talking about this entire COVID year and how weird the process has been relative to normal. And yet here you guys are. It's another banner class. I know it looks normal to us, but can you please detail for me how unnormal it's been for you guys really when you get on the ground level?
Yeah, how you doing, Steve and Josh? Good to be with you guys. Yeah, it's been a strange year. The biggest thing, you know, we got these guys on campus. You know, we got 15 guys here, and there was, I think, 5 or 6 guys that I had never met before in person, which is unbelievable. It was the first time they had been on campus. Very, very unique. I think the thing that's amazing is just we actually got to know their families, and they got to know each other even better because we were forced to go on Zooms and over communicate and really try to make sure that build those relationships even stronger because we weren't able to see each other in person. But at the end of the day, I got to give a lot of credit to our staff, to Mark Pantoni, putting together an unbelievable class. Really excited about these guys. They're really talented football-wise, but these are unbelievable kids, great students, and they're off to a great start here on campus.
Coach, speaking of that, who's been better than advertised on campus so far with your short time having them there?
Yeah, that's hard to say. Someone just asked me that on a press conference, and I was worried about it because the minute you say one, somebody else feels bad. Their parents are like, why didn't you mention me? So it's hard. But I think they've all been impressive. They haven't done a whole bunch yet. But, again, I just think that this class is a chance to be really good. I guess I've just been impressed with their approach so far. And also, I haven't seen them in person, some of these guys, for over a year. So they've all grown up. They've gotten bigger. They've gotten stronger. And they look like they're ready to go play in the spring.
We're talking to Ohio State head coach Ryan Day, fresh off an appearance in the national championship game, signing one of the top classes in America on this National Signing Day 2021. Coach, you just talked about a couple of things that are fascinating because we've never heard people say this before. You're signing guys that you haven't seen in person in quite a while, but yet you're talking about over-communication because you've been on Zoom constantly, and I'm fascinated, like no one knows how this is going to play out, but do you think in some weird sort of way you could end up 2 years down the road looking back on this class and saying, wow, that was more tightly knit and that was more together than any class we've had because of how different it ended up being?
I don't think there's any question. I think this is the closest group I've ever seen together. I saw a couple guys having lunch together, and they were laughing and cracking on each other and making fun of each other. And they just met each other about 4 or 5 days ago or whenever they got on campus. But because of Zoom, because of this year, they felt like they've known each other for a year, and they just literally physically met face-to-face, a week ago. And I just think that's an amazing dynamic, something that I didn't expect, but it's clear. This is a tight group. They felt like they've known each other for a long time, yet they just met each other. And I think that's what 2020 has been like with Zoom and these virtual type of modems to get to know each other. So, and we have. I think they have, and we have all overcompensated. And because of that, it's a very tight group.
Coach, with the way your staff recruits and goes about building relationships, do you feel like pandemic recruiting was kind of tailor-made for y'all to be as successful as you were?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I try not to overthink it. I don't know. I think one of the things we did a great job of is early on, we identified Jack Sawyer on defense and Kyle McCord on offense. And both of them are leaders. Both of them are excellent players. And they kind of built the class in terms of this getting to know each other and spent a lot of time on social media and different things, getting to know each other. And then I really leaned on them to give me feedback on the type of kids that were in the class. There's some kids that wanted to commit, some kids that, wanted to be a part of the class that maybe weren't a great fit. And because of that, I leaned on them to give us that type of information. And I think we did a good job of identifying them early and then leaning on them in this process. Because they know these kids better than we do. And that was really important.
Ohio State head coach Ryan Day. Coach, one more and we'll get you out of here on this. You just talked about Kyle McCord. You talked about Jack Sawyer and sort of the guys who take the class by the throat, for lack of a better term. You can't mention anyone specifically, but as we look down the road, I mean, Ohio State starts to accumulate those kind of guys well ahead of time. How in-depth and how in the weeds are you guys already, even today, with the 2022 class and beyond?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been the focus here really for the last month. And, we always try to recruit ahead and get out in front of this, but that same philosophy and same mindset we're going to have in this class until we can start having guys on campus and try to do the best we can of identifying the right culture fits, the right leaders early on, and then build those pieces around them. And I think that we've done that already in this class. So we'll just keep trying to, find the right culture fits, the right people. I think one of the really important things right now in recruiting more than ever, with the way things are going, with the COVID, with one-time transfer rule coming down the tubes, you have to be as honest as you ever have been in recruiting. You have to be as transparent as possible because they have to come here knowing that this is where they want to be, and they have wanted to pick this. You can't talk them into coming to your school anymore. I really don't believe that at all. I think what it is it's about being transparent, telling them exactly what this place is, and then showing them all the reasons why we think it's a great fit, and then building it from there. And that's been our recipe, and hopefully we can just keep building on from here.
That's really awesome stuff to wrap it up. Ohio State head coach Ryan Day. Coach, we appreciate it. Congratulations on another great class. Have a great rest of the day. We appreciate you joining us.
I appreciate you guys and all your work. Thanks.
So there, you know what, Steve? I mean, as we're looking at the Big Ten class rankings, I think that was pretty fascinating, and maybe it went over some heads, but I want to slow down and kind of recap what he just said. He said, I don't think that you can talk guys into coming into your program right now. You got to be brutally honest with them. And he also spoke about that within the context of there were some guys who wanted in on this class, and, our leaders maybe didn't think they were the best fit. That is the approach that the few have, that maybe the many can't afford to have. And there you see why. That's why that Buckeye class is ranked far and away #1 already in the Big Ten.
It's hard to maintain a good culture in your program. It takes a lot of discipline. And I was talking to a coach yesterday with the way Alabama recruits. I think that at each position group, a prospect that Alabama's recruiting has to check 5 boxes. And if they don't check all 5, they're not going to get recruited by Alabama. That doesn't mean they won't be a good football player elsewhere, but there's a certain criteria to play at Alabama. There's a certain criteria to play at Ohio State. And if you're a head coach that's able to keep your program disciplined within that and not stray and take a reach here and there, generally you're going to stay consistent on Saturdays with your win total.
And here again is what's just fascinating if you're a college football fan, not just Ohio State or Alabama, but if you're just watching it and maybe you're not necessarily playing favorites, you can have, as we look at the Big Ten rankings there, the tendency to say, man, they're far and away the #1 class in the conference here. I mean, they got 5 5-star kids, 13 4-star kids, whatever the case may be, and yet you listen to him talk, him being Ryan Day, you listen to Nick Saban at Alabama talk. It's a complete and utter, figuratively, of course, war on the recruiting trail because they're really competing against the standard, and the only programs that really come close to matching that standard out there may not always be in your conference, and yet you're going to see them down the road in the playoff. We just saw in the national championship game beforehand, we were comparing the classes. We were comparing the roster and saying, number one, we don't think this is the last 2 times that these teams or these head coaches may face off on the field, but number 2, we're about to go into signing day season, and it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be the same 2 teams, and here we are talking about them. Bama, Ohio State, 1-2.
Well, I think Ohio State's rival has kind of become Clemson right now. That's kind of the showdown year in and year out that you're waiting for at the end of the year with with the game with all the marbles on the line. And so within the SEC, you have some rivalries. But, Ohio State, it was Oklahoma for a minute when they had Baker Mayfield and those guys, and now it's kind of pivoted to Clemson. Michigan's trying to reel that back in and make the game the big rivalry it once was. And with the way Michigan's recruiting the last 2 cycles, they've given themselves a chance against Ohio State with the speed that they've recruited these 2 cycles together on offense. They could be really potent if this comes together in year 3 under Josh Gaddis. They go out and they get their 5-star quarterback this year in J.J. McCarthy to come in and push that room. But you look at the way they've recruited receiver, A.J. Henning and Roman Wilson last cycle, and then Worthy this cycle. Those 3 can run with anybody. Blake Corum, their running back, is a 4.4 kid out of the DMV that they land last cycle. And then they come in with Donovan Edwards, a 5-star in the top 247 this year, who just led his team to a state title in the state of Michigan. Those are guys that can score a touchdown on any given touch and give Michigan a chance to start being competitive against Ohio State again.
Steve, you're talking about Michigan. I mean, Michigan got a really good class here. They're currently ranked number 10. We've got our eye on them for a couple of different reasons today, but you just mentioned 3 names. Well, I'm going to add one into the 2 you mentioned. I'm looking at my screen right now, and I got J.J. McCarthy, and that's my 5-star quarterback I've got coming in, and it's hopefully that guy that can galvanize the program and multiple recruiting classes. Maybe he's the guy that this big-time receiver talent wants to come play with. We've already seen Xavier Worthy commit, top 100 wide receiver. Donovan Edwards recently signed his papers to go play at the University of Michigan, high 4-star running back. So overall, Steve, I got to tell you, for me personally, I'm as excited about the top 3 names on this list we're looking at right now of Michigan's recruiting in this class as I have been any names that I've seen there in a couple of years.
Well, Donovan Edwards is a guy that was coveted by every program in the country to keep him home over the likes of Georgia and Oklahoma. He was a guy that was even considered an Ohio State lean early on before they land Travion Henderson and Evan Pryor. So to beat these schools that you're trying to ascend to, you have to beat them on the recruiting trail. And if you look at Michigan's recruiting classes the last 2 cycles, they have had wins over fellow blue blood programs, and I think has put themselves in position to really rebound here this coming year. And I feel like their program was at the same crossroads that Brian Kelly was at when they were 4-8. And Brian Kelly made some significant staff changes. Coach Harbaugh's made the same, and Notre Dame has won at least 10 games in 4 straight years and been in a couple college football playoffs. That's what Michigan's looking at, and I think they could bounce back just as quick.
Trey, we talk about the Big Ten a lot, obviously. It's a multiple huge markets for us, and Michigan's always there. Ohio State's always there. I'm kind of fascinated as we zoom it out a little bit. Paul Chryst in Wisconsin making a lot of noise. Big out-of-state pickups in this cycle. Penn State, there's always a lot of focus there. We just showed our top 40 rankings. Penn State, as we sit at the moment, ranked just inside the top 25 at number 24. Interestingly enough, 1 spot behind Pitt. So there's a nice Keystone State battle going on there. But overall, just the general feel. You guys write a lot at the desk level about the Big Ten. The overall feel behind Ohio State about the state of Big Ten recruiting, a hierarchy, if you will.
So I'd actually like to stick with Penn State there, as you mentioned it. 1 and 2 in the Big Ten is the same as last year, Ohio State and Michigan. But last year, number 3 was Penn State. This year, Penn State's number 7. I'm looking at the top football recruits in the class of 2021 in the state of Pennsylvania. Check this out. Only 1 of them is committed to Penn State. So I kind of want to know, Steve, what's going on there. I know that it was a disappointing year on the field for the Nittany Lions. And you're allowed to have a bad year, and I think James Franklin knew that, but there was some frustration last cycle that they weren't closer with Julian Fleming, the top recruit in the state. They didn't get Nolan Rucci, the top recruit in the state this year. This is trending in the wrong direction. Is it just a blip, or should Penn State fans be a little bit worried?
And while you hate seeing Julian Fleming and Nolan Rucci go to schools in your conference as well, is not your place. If you look closer at this Penn State class, I like to look at the average ranking per commit category. Penn State, they only got 15 commits. When you look at average ranking per commit, it's tied for number 3 in the conference right now with Wisconsin, and they still have 4-star pass rusher Davon Townley on the board later today, and I like where the Nittany Lions stand with him. And this is a class Landon Tengwall is enrolled early, not playing his senior year. He can come in and give them some instant help on the offensive line. I think Lonnie White gives them another playmaker at receiver, and if they can land Davon Townley and pair him with Rodney McGraw, those are 2 high upside defensive ends that could emerge into 2 of the premier pass rushers in the Big Ten.
That is kind of an interesting juxtaposition, because I'm telling you right now, the overall general casual fan feel probably mirrors a lot of what Trey said. And then, I mean, that's why you're here, because you get a little bit more granular down in the weeds, and you probably start thinking a lot more along the lines of what their staff has been thinking when they look at the overall makeup of their class. I mean, James Franklin is a guy who did it at Vanderbilt. Like, there was really no doubt that he has the ability to do it. You never know. I've been saying this for a while. You never know program to program how this year could have impacted someone. I know everyone dealt with COVID. It was very disproportionate. And so you have no clue how that mattered, how it factored in, and yet they still sit top 25. They've got some room left to go. It's a smaller signing class at the moment, and you're talking about the average player ranking, and that creates a different conversation for us.
Yeah, because it shows that they're still kind of recruiting in that same lane that they typically do. And then, you know, Penn State's got great strength and conditioning. He made some changes on his staff, brings in Mike Yursich to be his offensive coordinator, and there already seems to be a ton of buzz with that. Mike Yursich, I'm already hearing his name a ton on the recruiting trail with 2022 recruits and him already connecting with them. So he's hit the ground running in Happy Valley. And Penn State, I know they're number 24 in the cycle right now, would be higher in average ranking per commit. They're number 2 in 2022 right now, so they're right behind Ohio State. Well, I shouldn't say right behind. Ohio State's really running away with it in 2022. But Penn State's number 2, man, out of all the teams in college football early in 2022. So their recruiting is what it's been, and they're a developmental program that's knocked on the door of the college football playoff 3 times. Let's not let one pandemic-ridden season change your feelings of what they've had in Penn State, which has been some really, really good football teams, and I think they will have again soon.
The Wisconsin Badgers are sitting number 15 in America right now. We just talked about the loser in the Nolan Ruggie sweepstakes. Well, that means there was a winner, and it was Paul Christ and the University of Wisconsin. Steve, they're 3rd in the Big Ten right now, 15th overall. I'm scrolling down this list, and I see offensive tackle, offensive tackle, offensive tackle as the top 3 players who have signed a letter of intent. Is there anything more Wisconsin than that?
I was going to ask you if you thought where you would guess where the premier players in their class are, and it's certainly offensive line on paper, but if you kind of look at the rest of the guys in this class, Hunter Wohler, an in-state safety, a hard hitter, one of the hardest hitters in the Midwest, Marcus Allen out of the state of Ohio, Daryl Peterson, a defensive end out of the state of Ohio, and Brian Sanborn, a linebacker from the state of Illinois. Sanborn didn't play this year, but those guys, they fill the box score. They make plays on Friday nights. Daryl Peterson lives in the backfield. Marcus Allen had a tremendous senior year. Braylon Allen is a reclassification from the 2022 class. There might not be a stronger player in America than Braylon Allen. If you go to his Twitter and check out his workout videos, Olympic lifts, just regular lifts, that kid is a weight room machine and just fits the culture of what Wisconsin's looking for.
It was really interesting when we came into this year. They had that really early season game. Trey, I think it was Minnesota, or who did they play early, where we saw Graham Mertz just go off?
Illinois.
Yeah, Illinois. Yeah, so we saw Graham Mertz go off, and like there was talk in the Slack channels that we talk in at halftime. Is this the new Wisconsin, man? Is this like Alabama North offensively? And obviously that was a little bit premature, but it's really interesting when we talk about potentially a little offensive shift, a subtle offensive shift, but yet we look at this signing class. I mean, this seems pretty vintage Wisconsin, and yet Steve's talking about some of these guys that we're looking at, and obviously you want to mix in new principles, stick to your identity, but Wisconsin football, like if we were classifying most interesting programs to watch evolve next 5 years, they're in my top 5.
They have to be better offensively. They were number 106 nationally this year in yards per play. I remember I watched almost every single Wisconsin game, and I think in the last 4 weeks they scored 4 touchdowns. So they didn't make these mass changes. I think Graham Mertz can be better. We were so excited after Illinois. I was like, man. Because Graham Mertz last year, we thought going into the 2019 season, he would be the most likely freshman quarterback to start. Sam Howell, Jaden Daniels, Hank Bachmeier, and Graham Mertz was in that mix, and he didn't get to do that. It took a while. And then after that Illinois game, he got COVID. They had to go on pause for 3 weeks. It was never the same. They looked very poor afterward. But Jalen Berger, Graham Mertz, can you find some receivers? Because you know the offensive line and the defense are going to be good.
Well, one thing that was also missing was Danny Davis and Kendrick Pryor, guys that were running past everybody on Illinois' team that day. Wisconsin didn't have them for much of the year, and so when you're breaking in a freshman quarterback, all their running backs get hurt. One of their running backs is a converted receiver from Wisconsin. He's a converted receiver from Indianapolis. They recruited as a receiver and bulked him up, and and so he's in their backfield. He gets hurt, and so they dealt with a lot of injuries last year, and in addition to COVID, and it really hampered what they were trying to do on offense.
Let's keep it here in the Big Ten, actually. Maryland, because when you're talking about Maryland, it is a Big Ten program, and not only are they a Big Ten program, they also sit ranked inside the top 20 right now. And when Mike Locksley was hired at Maryland, the first word out of Terps fans' mouths was not even football, it was recruiting. And then recruiting again, and recruiting probably a third time. This is probably along the lines of what they had in mind. It was a big deal to get Townley Tonga-Bailoa from Alabama last year, and now that was in the transfer portal. This year, we're looking at a straight-up recruiting class, Steve. It starts with Terrence Lewis, and let's work from there. What stands out?
Well, they got a lot more athletic in the front seven. Maryland last year, they ranked 115th nationally in rush defense. I think Good Counsel, St. Francis, and Washington, D.C. Gonzaga could have ran the ball against Maryland last year, let alone the college football teams they played against. So they really emphasized recruiting in the front seven, and they go out and they land maybe the best pass rusher in this class. Didn't play his senior year because of the pandemic, but Damian Robinson, they call him Chop Robinson. So I'm excited for Chop Robinson to become a household name on the college level. But they land him. They get important defensive tackle gets Tyzay Johnson, Tommy King Bisote, and Andre Porter are strong guys at the point of attack that also bring pass rush ability. Terrence Lewis and Brandon Jennings were guys that were committed to Tennessee and Michigan respectively. Those are run and hit linebackers that I think will certainly help against the run. And even Ziangelo Shockley and Darrell Jackson are two other guys with length on the edge. There's just a lot of versatility, a lot of size and athleticism coming in that Maryland front seven that will give them a chance to be more stingy on defense against these Big Ten teams.
What's the overall feel, Steve, when you talk to other folks, maybe inside Maryland but outside of Maryland, and they look at Maryland? What's the overall feel about their roster, where their program is? And, you know, sometimes it's a 1-year rebuild. Sometimes it's a 4-year rebuild. What's the overall feel about where Maryland's at right now?
Well, I think that Mike Locksley, and one of the big reasons why he got the job is the high school coaches love him in the area. And so if there's a blue chipper in the DMV, he's not going to get them all, but they're going to have a chance to land those guys. And you see that in this class where a lot of the guys I just named are backyard recruits that they, beat other Power 5 schools and sometimes Power 5 powerhouses to keep it home. And so the high school coaches are bought in, and anytime recruiting's going well, your record on the field is not as relevant to maybe the health of your program. It's when the recruiting starts to go bad is when it's probably time to start changing the regime, because they're on to you. The next wave's on to you, and it's going to be tough to rise up from where your current stature is.
All right, so let's hard pivot here. Again, we have multiple live commitments coming up your way. One, just a few minutes from now, is Davon Townley. He's a 6'6", 220-pound defensive end out of the Minneapolis area. So before we get the audience ready for his commitment, Steve, if I'm asking you 20 seconds, tell me about that kid like I've never seen him before. What are we talking about here?
Well, Davon Townley, this is one of the guys that you look up in a couple of years, and he's one of the best defensive ends in college football. He's 6'6", 220 pounds. He's explosive and physical with a ton of room to grow. And Josh, he has all the traits coveted at the position to be developed into a feared pass rusher. And whether it's pinning his ears and blitzing or on a rundown, he's in the backfield in a hurry. Ultra explosive. Alan True, our Midwest analyst, put Davon Townley on our radar pretty early. He's been a 4-star with us much of the cycle. He's an above-the-rim basketball player. He's a relentless rebounder, so he's a multi-sport standout, and he's a guy that probably should have been recruited a little more highly than he was. These are the kind of guys that Penn State gets and shows up inside the shoe and gives Ohio State hell on Saturday.
Here's more on Davon Townley.
Davon Townley, this is one of the guys you look up in a couple years, and he's one of the best defensive ends in college football. 6'6", 220 pounds, explosive, physical, with a ton of room to grow.
One of the most intriguing kids in this year's 2021 class. Only played football for 2 years, former basketball player. We love two-sport athletes. We love those hybrid 6'6", 220-pound guys that can kind of play on the edge. Different schools have been involved.
Penn State, Nebraska, Washington among the final contenders for this prospect.
And there you see again the prospect profile here, waiting for Davon Townley. We'll talk to him momentarily and get his commitment. 4-star again out of the Minneapolis area. First guess is it's really cold up there this morning. But the second guess, Steve, where do the crystal balls lie? What's the general expectation before we go into the commitment here?
Well, the buzz has favored Penn State here down the stretch. Minnesota and Arizona State were some of the schools rumored to be near the top at the early signing period, but he elected not to put pen to paper, obviously. That's why he's here with us. And I think that Penn State's long-standing relationship and their need on the edge really spoke to Davon Townley, who is really deciding now between Penn State, Nebraska, who I'm told his father really likes, and Washington as maybe the dark horse. But Penn State has the buzz coming into this one, and we'll see if James Franklin and his staff indeed brought it home. Well, we were done talking. So let's talk now directly to Davon Townley. Again, 6'6", 220 pounds, out of the Minneapolis area, plays defensive end. It's a big morning for you, Davon. So first off, before we get the commitment, I want you to just zoom out, take a deep breath. Tell me, what has this recruiting process been like, man?
The recruiting process has been good. It's something that, you know what I'm saying, I'm blessed to be a part of. And it's huge. Yeah, it's huge, and I'm just excited right now. Kind of like, I don't know what to say, but I'm super excited. And it's been a rough couple of months because, you know, COVID and, you know, the pandemic. It was harder to do stuff as far as staying in contact with the schools, and everything was virtual, and you couldn't go visit or do nothing like that. So it was good and bad.
Davon Townley joining us. We're about to get his commitment. Davon, before we get the commitment from you, you know what you're about to pick. We don't. But tell me, before you do it, how late into the night did this go, or have you known for quite a while that this is the commitment, this is the place you're headed?
I've known for a while that this is what I was going to do. I just wanted to be sure because, you know, this is the next chapter in my life, and I just want to make sure it's the smart move. And just making sure that I'm ready to do this for the next 4 years, making sure I'm doing it at the right place.
Davon Townley, without further ado, the floor is yours, my man. Make your commitment.
I'm excited to announce that I will be playing football for Coach Franklin at Penn State. Go Lions. You know.
We got the hat. It's official now. Davon Townley headed to Penn State, headed to Happy Valley to play for James Franklin and the Penn State Nittany Lions. We talked about Penn State just a second ago, Steve. We're going to get Davon back on the line here after the applause dies down. But, I mean, really quick, there's the banner. Hey, listen, I think pennants are very underrated, and we should use them in recruiting commitments more often. But let's take a look at the film here. This is what you expected. Initial reaction.
Well, I think this is the kind of guy that can be a difference maker for Penn State in the Big Ten and evolve into one of the premier players on the edge. This is the kind of guy that Penn State's been winning 11 football games typically every year with, and he's the kind of guy that can come in and maybe develop into the next Yetur Gross-Matos or player on the edge that they've had success with, Sharif Miller of the world.
So Davon Townley, again, if you were just joining us, like in the last 30 seconds, he has committed to Penn State, a huge pickup. Davon, we got you back now. The applause has died down. Number one, congratulations. And number two, tell me why Penn State?
Thank you. And I chose Penn State because, first off, they're a good school on the athletic side, but also academics is important too. So I feel like I was setting myself up to be in a good position for the next 4 years by choosing Penn State.
Just talk about who on Penn State's staff you built a close relationship with and what they were able to do to make you comfortable with Happy Valley.
I've built a good relationship with Coach James Franklin. and some of his other defensive staff, and they just took the time to, show me how important I am to them and being consistent and showing me why I should go there and play football and continue my education there.
So, Davon, a lot of folks watching, they see Coach Franklin at the press conference, they see him on TV on Saturdays, they sit in the stadium, they watch him on the sidelines, but they don't get to be recruited by James Franklin and Penn State. You have. So you're very, very rare. What's it like? Take us behind the scenes being recruited by James Franklin, and maybe is there anything different between him and some of the other coaches you deal with?
Something different about Coach James Franklin is that he expressed how happy he was, and his excitement to not only recruit me, but get to know me as a person, and that means a lot to me because just knowing that, just this whole thing being virtual, and getting the feeling from the coach that he cares about you, and that he wants to know you as a person and a player. It feels good.
I'm skimming Alan True's story about your commitment to Penn State on 247 Sports right now, and as we know, you've only been playing football for real since you're a junior. Did it just come so easy for you? And just talk about the potential you think you have on the next level as a Nittany Lion.
Yeah, so I did start playing football my junior year, and I feel like it was a good decision, and it helped me grow as a person and as a player. And I feel like I'll be a great player at the next level. And I have a lot of
Davon,
potential.
As we wrap it up here with you, tell me if there's one or two things you're focused on right now about improving your game as you head to Penn State. What's number one on the priority list?
I feel like I could be more of a physical presence, like getting bigger, putting on some weight, and getting quicker on my feet. And then I feel like I'll be at the top of my potential and getting my hands better too.
Davon Townley, again, congratulations, my man. He's headed to Penn State by way of Minneapolis. Have a great rest of your day, and we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
So there you have it. That's another big verbal commitment that we have knocked down. Davon Townley is headed to Penn State, and we're looking at overall the top recruits in this Nittany Lions class. And we were talking about this just a second ago, Steve. With the addition of Davon Townley, it kind of changes the complexion of this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And a name not listed there is Rodney McGraw, who's another 6'6", 240-pound, high upside body type that Penn State's had a lot of success with. You add Davon Townley and Rodney McGraw to your football team, they could be massive and very athletic on the edge. And Rodney McGraw, like Davon Townley, those guys are guys with basketball backgrounds who are pretty fresh in focusing on football. And I think the best is yet to come for both of them. And we got a little bit of breaking news, Josh. Kamar Wheaton has signed his letter of intent for Alabama, which solidifies the #1 recruiting class in 247 Sports history, all time, surpassing the 2010 Florida class. Let's see if they can come in and have the same amount of success that this 2017 Alabama class had that they're replacing. And Alabama still may not be done today. They're in the mix for Terrion Arnold, the #2 safety in the top 247, a 5-star recruit. They're battling Georgia here at the finish. So Alabama still looking to add Terrion Arnold today and maybe JT Tuimoloau later this spring. But this class, #1 all time, Trey.
Yeah, Trey, take that away, because I just want to pause and reflect on what we just teed up. We're not talking about the best class of the signing period. We're talking about the best of all time, shattering records of classes that are spoken in like a more fabled manner than reality at this point.
That 2010 Florida class with 5-5-star defensive linemen is, as far as the 247 Sports composite team recruiting rankings numbers goes, the gold standard. But Steve, you hit on it. 2017 Alabama, for our money, has to be considered the best class ever. Judy, Ruggs, Avonte Smith, Najee, Tua, Mac Jones, Leatherwood, Moses. I mean, I can keep going. Can this class do what 2017 did? I don't know. That's going to be pretty tough. But the fact of the matter is, Alabama not only now has the best ranked class ever in 2021, but they have the best class ever as well in 2017. I know that's a little confusing, but that's using two different ways to look at it. It's rather remarkable what Nick Saban does. 9 number 1 classes all time now in the last 11 years, 7 national titles.
This class fills some of the holes that 2017 class is leaving behind. I think that Alabama went into this cycle looking to get some guys that could be instant impact on the offensive line. J.C. Latham and Tommy Brockermeyer are 2 guys. If you're betting on anyone from this class playing early, it would be those 2, and they need some instant help at wide receiver. And Ja'Cory Brooks out of IMG Academy in the state of Florida, he's a guy that I think that they'll be able to count on in their receiver room from day one.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the receiver class, not just last year, but the last 2 years now, that is hitting the exit door in Tuscaloosa. And so I think conventional wisdom and maybe even, dare I say, hope amongst the rest of the nation would be there's no way you're replacing those guys. And yet you're talking about Ja'Cory Brooks and Aggie Hall's in this class, Christian Leary's in this class. They've got several of the top 100 overall players in the country playing the wide receiver position, committed. Steve, number one, it's inevitable that we're going to see a lot of these guys on the field as true freshmen. And number two, I guess the fear is there's such an entrenched system in place here that maybe it's just plug and go at this point.
Well, that's what Alabama's recruited for, is to just continue to reload, and we've seen them do that time and again. But this is now they're new OC, a new quarterback next year, losing some pivotal guys on the offensive line. Their receiver room is cleaned out. They've lost a difference maker at tight end and Irv Smith over the last couple years. So Alabama, we'll see. This might be a transition year for Nick Saban and company, but they're going to be uber talented going into the fall next year still.
Again, what we just confirmed there, Kamar Wheaton, 5-star running back, will indeed sign with the University of Alabama. You and I kind of talked the other day, and it wasn't like the door was completely slammed shut. He was verbally committed, but yet we wonder, could Oklahoma still be there? Now that we know what the outcome is, Steve, what was that recruitment like the final week?
Oh, man. Well, I thought the day I woke up was going to be a easy day of just getting a Kamar Wheaton analysis story for the Oklahoma site set to go and just head on into the holidays easy. But then you got Bama Online insider Tim Watts reaching out with some intel that Alabama's alive, and then you're reaching out to some sources that had said a couple weeks ago that Alabama wasn't in it, and he's clearly going to Oklahoma, all of a sudden saying, well, he had a conversation with Nick Saban. And it goes back to pandemic recruiting. And I'm telling you right now that Nick Saban is one conversation away from getting a recruit in the boat. And sometimes you need to get that young man to your campus. You need to get that young man to your campus 2 or 3 times to get yourself back in the game after a young man talked to Nick Saban.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Ryan Day, we just talked to him a few minutes ago. And he was talking about perception versus reality. And the perception is, well, since guys haven't been able to get on campus officially at least, and all you've done is talk to them over Zoom, that, there's a lack of communication and there's a disconnect. And yet you heard it with Ryan Day. I guarantee you in some shape, form, or fashion, Nick Saban later today at his press conference will say, in some ways, yeah, it was challenging. But in other ways, because of what we were forced to do on platforms like Zoom, you feel in some ways like you've never communicated more with some guys in your signing class. And it's no coincidence, as you've talked about all morning and will continue to talk about, that the cream rose again regardless of the hurdles in front of them.
You just weren't able to win a recruiting battle by getting a young man to your campus and him coming to a rivalry game that you win. He's surrounded by 7 or 8 other guys that he might play with at the school, and those guys have really connected. These recruitments were really decided by young men getting to know, and their families getting to know these coaches through phone calls and FaceTimes and Zooms, and there was really not much emotion and atmosphere to get captured up. And so when you talk about the way Alabama and Clemson recruit, that's tailor-made for them to win most of the head-to-heads that they're involved in. And then Ohio State, Georgia and Oregon and LSU, those are 4 head coaches that aren't going to be outworked by anybody. So pandemic recruiting took those programs to even another level, I think, this cycle.
So, Steve, we can, as we kind of reset the top 10 and we look at the classes, we haven't had much movement, obviously, inside the top 5 this morning, but we can now not only confirm Alabama will land the top class in America this cycle, we're talking about landing the top class of all time with Kamar Wheaton in the house. Still got Terry and Arnold to go later today. Who knows what happens with Brian Thomas and guys like that. But as we're looking 1 through 5 again to reset things, if you're just joining us, it's Alabama, it's Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Clemson. Then we get some Pac-12 flavor in there with Oregon and USC at 6th and 8th, respectively. Steve, I guess the morning so far, it's gone about how we thought it would.
Yeah, no surprises yet. I think the one recruitment that I'm really going into today, complete mystery of what the young man's going to do, is Terry and Arnold. I mean, my gut coming into this week was that Alabama had the edge, and Georgia's in there trying to make up ground. And I know he's been talking to the Bulldog staff a lot, Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning and company, talking to him about being the face of the defense. This is a huge cycle for Georgia in the secondary. They need to replace a lot of difference makers on the back end, and they go out and get a guy like 5-star Nyland Green, and if they can go out and add 5-star Terry and Arnold to that, it really solidifies what they already have in the boat as guys that can come in early and push the likes of Keely Ringo and Jalen Kimber and company who they signed in last class.
Yeah, before we go off the air, we're going to talk a lot more about Terry and Arnold. That's a commitment coming up later today. Georgia's there, Bama's there, Florida have been heavily involved, obviously. But Trey, we got to talk about your country, the Big 12 country, for a little while. And Sark has been at Texas about 15 minutes right now, so it's hard to gauge how effective he's been in his first signing class. But Oklahoma, right there inside the top 11.
Yeah.
Why do we always stop at 10? So Oklahoma currently sitting at number 11. This has been another great class for Lincoln Riley. They're obviously setting the pace now in the Big 12 and have for a couple of cycles. Let's talk about the general flavor as we would expect in the 1-2 in no particular order, and then the gap, and then we see the rest of the field.
So Oklahoma was not number 1 in the Big 12 last year, jumped Texas this year to claim it, rightfully so. Caleb Williams, he'll be their starter in 2022 after Spencer Rattler goes pro. My question for Oklahoma is, are they going to keep getting better defensively? I think they will. Clayton Smith, I believe, a great outside linebacker prospect who they're inking. It doesn't seem like there's too much of a disappointment on OU's end, Steve. I know they were a little upset they couldn't finish with Kamar Wheaton. I know they thought they might get Tristan Lee, the offensive tackle, but Lincoln Riley does a great job recruiting, and I think almost it surprises me sometimes how good of a job he does, because you think about these coaches who are offensive geniuses, you think, hey, they might not want to grind on the recruiting trail. They can just get whoever they want. They can throw them on the field. They'll scheme something up. Lincoln Riley gets it. Don't take this the wrong way. He's lost enough playoff games to know my talent has to improve, and Oklahoma's doing that.
Well, when Bob Stoops surprisingly retired and handed the keys to Lincoln Riley, the first 3 days were just recruiting phone calls for Lincoln Riley and making sure everything was right with the ship. And he's a guy that is an integral part of what Oklahoma does on the trail, and quite frankly could be mentioned with those guys that we've been mentioning so much in the show. And this class is a pretty standard Oklahoma class on offense. They have Brock Vandergrift committed early, a 247Sports composite 5-star. He flips to in-state Georgia, so they just go right out and land the number 1 quarterback in the country, Caleb Williams, and he's got dynamic receivers, Mario Williams, Billy Bowman, and Cody Jackson in the fold. But defensively, I've never seen Oklahoma recruit like this defensively. And Trey brought up that Oklahoma has been getting better on defense. It was number 38 this year, and just a couple years ago they were number 114. So they've come miles defensively, and I know you've talked about it a bunch on your show, Late Kick. But these are guys in their front 7. Guys that play on both sides of the ball in high school, your Clayton Smiths and your Danny Stutzmans and Ethan Downs. Those are guys that are making an impact on offense and defense, and they can all rush the passer. They're all athletic. We just had Davon Townley announce his college decision on the show. Nathan Rawlings-Kabong is a guy that's ranked as a 4-star by us that's in the same mold. He's going to play basketball in Norman also. He's 6'7", I think like 250 pounds. I think he could be a special defensive lineman in Norman. And Kelvin Gilliam is a guy that they committed over Penn State, held off Notre Dame late to keep him in the fold. So Oklahoma in the front 7, particularly in this class, this is the best I've seen them recruit. A lot of guys that can go get the quarterback, a lot of guys with high ceilings, and I think we're going to see this defense, this plan that Alex Grinch has, keep coming together year after year.
Josh, I totally forgot to mention it really quick. they're also crushing it in the transfer portal. They took those 3 kids. They got those 3 commits from Tennessee, the 3 transfers. Key Lawrence, the defensive back. Eric Gray, star running back, potentially. Wanye Morris, former left tackle, 5-star signee for the Vols. I think Oklahoma is a lock maybe to win the Big 12 in 2021. I've got them in the playoff penciled in here. I think it's going to be a pretty special year in Norman.
It's that transfer portal sprinkle. You're not going to win a championship by taking 12 to 14 guys out of the portal and trying to make over your roster. But if you can sprinkle in a Wanye Morris and a Keyshawn Lawrence, who you had a great relationship with and you were the runner-up for, and the recruit, don't throw it all away if you're the runner-up in this transfer portal area and get mad when the young man tells you he's going elsewhere, because you might be on the phone with him again in 9 months like Oklahoma was with Lawrence, and he's on their team now and maybe helps them get to the college football playoff.
Yeah, we're going to dive headfirst into the transfer portal in just a few minutes because this is fascinating. Like, if I'm an Oklahoma fan, and you're talking to me about my team being right there on the precipice of being a top 10 recruiter this year, I'm telling you, man, we ain't number 11. We're inside the top 5 because I'm taking the transfer portal, and like you just said, I'm taking my cake, and then the icing on top is my transfer portal addition, or in their case, additions. I mean, these are instant impact guys, and it's really cool to, well, I guess cool may be the right word, or you may hate it, depending on your stance on the state of college football. But, Steve, and we'll get into this a lot more later, when you're talking to coaching staffs, we just saw Dan Mullen. I mean, did he know a year ago that Eric Gilbert was going to be wearing a Florida Gator uniform? We were talking about him committing to LSU a year ago. And so when you recruit these guys out of high school, there's never been more incentive to just drop that old KIT. Just keep in touch, man. Keep my number in your cell phone. We may reconnect down the road. That's got to be the approach now.
Man, and Florida wasn't even a finalist for Eric Gilbert the first time around. That was LSU, Alabama, and Georgia. And I'll never forget, after he committed, talking to some people that worked at LSU, and they're on the field practicing, and the personnel guys just come running out of the building going crazy, and the coaches on the field have no idea what's going on, and Eric Gilbert has committed to LSU. And I think we saw a similar celebration for Florida on social media after Eric Gilbert announced his plans for the Gators. But to add him, and to add DeMarcus Bowman, who is a guy that can score anytime he touches the football from that 2020 class, a guy he originally committed to Clemson in what was a close recruiting battle. Clemson had to fight to keep him in the fold. They get him to campus, but he just was never completely comfortable there. He's back home. He's at Florida, and you're adding those 2 guys to an offense that's going to need an influx of playmakers for what they just lost last fall.
So a reminder to reset things this morning, if you're just joining us, we had Avonte Dickerson, his live commitment. He heads to Oregon. Davon Townley just a couple of minutes ago made it official. He's headed to Penn State. We've got the commitment of Rajon Davis coming up in the next hour, and we've still got obviously a lot to talk about here. But Steve, I wanted to go back just quickly to the Big 12. We talked about Texas. We talked about Oklahoma. Outside of the 2 big programs there, the big recruiters, is there anything else, any other players or any other classes being put together that sort of stand out to you?
Yeah, I think that West Virginia is really a program that's on the come up right now. They have the number 4 class in the Big 12. I really like this quarterback that they have committed out of the state of Alabama, Will Crowder. I think he's the future of the program. I believe his nickname is Goose. Yep. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot of Goose Crowder in Morgantown. But Davis Mallinger is one of the fastest receivers in the country. They just landed a lot of playmakers on offense. Caden Prather, a wideout that they beat Penn State on. Jalen Anderson is one of the best all-purpose backs in the country, a guy that could rush for over 1,000 yards and have over 1,000 yards receiving in the high school season. And then Wyatt Millam's an offensive tackle who I think they believe is their franchise guy at left tackle that can really solidify them on the edge. But this is a West Virginia class that I think gives them a chance to really ascend in the Big 12 and be one of those programs knocking on the door of Oklahoma and Texas and Iowa State and trying to win the league.
Trey, you know this conference. I mean, this is your conference. You have the actual keys to the conference. A lot of us don't get west of the Mississippi River. You head over there routinely. I mean, when you go out there, everyone knows the roster that Texas and Oklahoma are going to have, but yet every year it's some combination of Iowa State or Oklahoma State or maybe West Virginia down the road that are knocking right on the door. And they're competing, contending. If you just watched recruiting, that wouldn't make sense to you. But yet there are some very good head coaches, very good staffs in that conference that don't necessarily need perennial top 5 classes to be contenders. And so, break that down for me. The perception purely from a recruiting standpoint versus the reality of the product we see on the field?
I think it's twofold. I think Texas, first of all, has clearly struggled and not played up to its talent. So when Texas does that, that leaves the door open for other teams. Baylor, when they had Matt Rule, was so well coached in 2019. Iowa State, Matt Campbell, such a great coach. The Big 12 just has a lot of great coaches. Neil Brown, Gary Patterson, Mike Gundy. Mike Gundy was on our signing day show 2 years ago, just chilling, drinking a cup of coffee. We were like, Coach, tell us about these receivers who are like high 3-stars. He's like, we're going to get a few of them in here, and they're going to win us a few Blitnikovs, just kind of do what we usually do. There aren't brand names coming out of the recruiting trail. They turn into brand names in college. But if you're the Big 12 and you're trying to get back to national prominence, you're hoping that Texas starts to do a little bit of that on their own. This 2021 class, it's not really Sarkisian's fault that it's number 17 in the country. I think that's Tom Herman's doing. They're off to a hotter start in 2022. But as long as Texas doesn't rise to the occasion and play up to its talent level, the door is going to keep being open for someone to join Oklahoma every single year in Arlington.
One school that wasn't listed on that graphic was Iowa State. We know that even though they're ranked number 7 in our league, that we already regret that and that they're going to overperform the number 7 class in the Big 12. Tyler Moore is a guy that we rank as a 4-star. He's a tight end out of in-state who we think has a high ceiling. They have this young man, Howard Brown, who's a 300-pound defensive tackle recruit that plays quarterback on the high school level. Go watch some of Howard Brown's footage. But it's just another unique Iowa State. They just know where to find guys. Deion Silas, he's 5'6", 170 pounds from the state of Florida, but he's one of the best return guys in America, and he'll be a difference maker for them in space. So this is a class that for Iowa State is another one that's typical of what they do, and then they'll overachieve.
And Iowa State's class in 2021 doesn't even need to do anything when they get to campus. They return so much. They got Greg Eisworth coming back, 3-time first-team All-Big 12 player. I don't think that's ever happened. Brock Purdy's coming back. Charlie Kohler, Chase Allen, those 2 tight ends. Breece Hall will be back as well. Iowa State's like a top 7 team in college football, which it's crazy to think about, but they're one of those teams that whatever they get from any of these freshmen, and Steve, as you're rattling them off, I'm like, none of these guys are on my radar, but whatever they get from those guys this fall, it's just great because they're already going to have a great team.
Man, they went out and flipped Mike Rose from Ball State, the defending Mid-American Conference champions, Mac Chance, Ball State. Mike Rose, could you imagine him at Ball State right now? He's one of the best linebackers in the Big 12. That's how Iowa State wins.
So we just talked about transfer portal a second ago, and I promised you we were going to dive in. And this is not a pool that I would lie to you about. Let's dive into the transfer portal here. Just full go. So, Steve, it is rapidly evolving the way that we talk about college football. It's rapidly evolving the way that just our industry as a whole, to peel the curtain back, structures January and February from a content perspective now, but that's got to pale in comparison to what it's doing internally to coaching staffs. You and I have talked on the whip around for about the past month, not only about how hot the transfer portal is, and we just talked about Oklahoma, programs like Oklahoma getting immediate help, Eric Gilbert to Florida. It's not just that, though. It's the change in the overall personnel and staffing rosters from a coaching perspective to properly take advantage of this.
I mean, being organized, knowing when a young man's going to be in the portal, perhaps having your boots on the ground at high schools or with trainers, and knowing that, hey, Josh Pate's going to be in the portal. He's not yet. We can't talk to Josh Pate or his family, but we know that he's going to be in the portal because of our boots on the ground in Josh Pate's neck of the woods. We know he's going to be in there because oftentimes we see these guys land in the portal, and we kind of already know where they're going to land once it's official that they're in the portal. And so having the information beforehand is key for these big-time programs that are trying to add 1 or 2 difference makers to hoist the crystal ball.
And here's what's just fascinating. When you sort of gauge fans, and it's how we stack everything. It's how we develop every piece of our content. It's based on what you guys want. When you look at what's getting traction and you look at what's garnering the most interest, 10 years ago, I mean, this was like Christmas for National Signing Day. I mean, this was Christmas for college football fans. 10 years later, well, you've got an early signing period, and then you've got the national championship game, then you got the later signing period, and yet simultaneous to that, you have some of the biggest names from the previous signing period that are already transferring. And so it's sort of like the wild, wild west. 5 years from now, we'll have a really firm grasp on how to treat transfer portal season. Right now, it's like, we approach it this way, you guys approach it that way. But I'll tell you what you can't afford to do. From my money, you can't afford to be a staff that's sort of dipping your toe into this and dabbling, because too many of your rivals, like I said, have already taken a dive in. and they are benefiting from that. I mean, again, Eric Gilbert, it just blows my mind to think about how much emphasis we put on the fact that he had signed with LSU and he gave Alabama fans the swerve. We thought he'd be in Tuscaloosa, and yet no one even mentioned the city of Gainesville, Florida, and that's where he is right now as we take a look, Trey, at just a few of the many notable transfers already.
There are so many guys, and you talk about that, and just last night we were doing National Signing Day show prep, and Brendan Radley-Hiles, former elite recruit from Oklahoma, enters the portal. It's crazy, and it's the teams who are prepared. Josh, you mentioned it. It's the teams who are going to keep connections, and Steve said the same thing. They don't get disgruntled when they lose a guy. They say, okay, we're going to need this connection in a year or two. We're going to want to make sure that when DeMarcus Bowman enters the transfer portal, we know who to reach out to. And when Zach Charbonnet, I mean, it's staggering the amount of names that are entering the portal every day. We have a room in 247 Sports, a Slack channel that's always buzzing with names. And the interest, like you'll have coaches who, hey, have you heard anything on what this kid wants to do, and so on and so forth. And, you know, there's the Tate Martells out there who are going to get a lot of the buzz, probably not do much on the field. And then there's guys we've never heard of coming from the group of 5 level and even the FCS level who are going to be big-time players too. If your team is not adding 1 or 2 transfers a year, then you're in Alabama, you're at Clemson, you think you don't need it. But everybody else seems to be adding handfuls of them.
And what gives, I think, fans excitement, if I'm a Florida State fan right now, and it were 10 years ago, I'm looking and I'm saying 2021 is going to be a wasteland. Like, it's going to take us multiple years to ever matter on the field again, especially in relation to the big boys. And yet now it's 2021. And so I've got a new head coach. What's his name? Mike Norvell from Memphis. Okay, well, he comes in. How's he going to recruit? They're not even ranked in the top 25 now, and yet I can still have hope because I can know, well, maybe we're not slam dunking things on National Signing Day, but it doesn't matter because we have been slam dunking things in the transfer portal, and these guys could factor in as early as, I don't know, week 1 of this upcoming season.
I think even down the stretch, there were some schools that were saying, we don't want any more high school commits right now. We are all in the portal for a quick fix to get us into the winning realm, which will then we can recruit to a championship level after that. But it's hard to recruit at a championship level if you're 4-8.
And Trey, so here is the other side of that seesaw. Like, everyone's big on it right now, or a lot of staffs are. And so a lot of staffs, like Steve just said, they've opted for transfer portal over high school guys. Well, then you talk to high school coaches, like a lot of us do every single week. And obviously, they're not fans of that. And when you compound that with the fact that a lot of guys didn't have the ability to be seen because of what the last year entailed, you've got the feeling in our industry and in the high school industry right now that there may be some really good players that are falling through the cracks because not enough tape's out, they didn't get to play football in some cases, and some coaching staffs have opted transfer portal over high school. This 2021 class, there's going to be like an entire documentary that we could do on it down the road.
Well, it's going to be really great watching the group of 5 college football this year because you're going to have superstar kids at that level who probably should be playing Power 5 football. And a recent example is Texas took an edge rush transfer from Notre Dame instead of a high school player who they could have had for 4 or 5 years named Garfield Lawrence. And I don't know where he's going to go now, but that just shows you, like, this new staff comes in, they say, okay, expectations, this fan base is ready for us to win right now. We could take a raw kid, a 3-star, we can mold him into something, or we can take someone who's played collegiate snaps at a high level. Let's go do it. I think that means a squeeze for the high school players, and I think that's unfortunate. I think it's better for the overall, other levels of football. But then you have staffs like Florida. Dan Mullen's never going to recruit the way they want him to in Gainesville. We're talking about this 2010 Florida as this industry standard. Like, he's never going to have a number 1 class. But if you're recruiting number 10 and then you're adding 5 stars via the transfer portal, Eric Gilbert, DeMarcus Bowman, Brenton Cox, Justin Shorter, you're making up a lot of deficiencies on your roster. I think it's a good thing, but I do understand why high school football players are feeling a little bit of a squeeze.
Well, high school players, high school coaches, I'm looking at the live chat over here on our YouTube channel. Brother Bear, big friend of the program, by the way, asks, hey, in the SEC, don't these guys have to sit out a year? And that's the other side of this coin. It's like a 7-sided coin right now when we're talking about this because, Steve, this whole other factor is when people ask us that question, our answer is we don't know. Because there could be rule changes that come between now and this fall that allow guys to not have to sit out a year. It's this massive gray area right now that coaches out there would just love, one way or another. Can someone just please write it down on a piece of paper and then show it to everyone, style, and just say, hey, here are the rules we're playing by. Here's the way it's going to be, so you can have some certainty when you go into the transfer portal.
Yeah, I just think these young men that are going in the portal, there's some no-brainers. The guys that you know are going to find a home, the DeMarcus Bowmans of the world. But some of y'all that aren't playing, that are deep on the bench, are still getting a free education at a great institution. And your scholarship is not really contributing much on the field right now. So I'm sure that if given the opportunity, that scholarship would be better served for someone on the field. But you are in control of that scholarship. You can stay there and get your degree. And if you want this scholarship, help me graduate faster, then you can have it.
So we just got word that about 50 head coaches want me to fist bump you on that one. And so we will. Thank you for that, Steve Wilfong. Trey, just in general, so from your perspective, you guys are writing a lot on the transfer portal. And, you know, we look behind the scenes. We look at the traffic. People can't get enough of it. And so it's sort of changed the way in the future that you may end up structuring the front side of the year. It's like, which aspect of this whole deal, from the transfer portal perspective, which aspect is it that people gravitate to the most? Is it just who's in the portal? Is it why didn't it work out with the program they're at? How do they fit here? Or is it just kind of huge snowball with several layers to it?
I think it's a huge snowball with several layers to it. When Henry To'oTo'o entered the portal, a former elite signee for Tennessee, got a list of initial names. He was interested, the first schools, and we put that article out. Massive interest in it. I think fans just love the idea of a re-recruitment for a player, and the fans love the opportunity to get better bit by bit and to rebuild their programs that way. There's a ton of interest. It's not so much as, for the case of the Tennessee guys, I understand why they left, but they're crazy attraction as for what's next for them. Anytime you can get a household name in college football to go on the open market, I think it makes sense why people are interested. It's funny, a few years ago when Joe Burrow announced he was transferring, this was like kind of the beginning of, the transfer portal wasn't a thing yet officially, but I remember seeing some list of 7 schools Joe Burrow could play at, and it's Cincinnati, it's Iowa State, and it's LSU, and little did we know how big of an impact that would have.
I talked to one Big Ten staffer over the weekend that said that sometimes if you are linked to a kid in the portal, it can create insecurities in your own position room at the school. Guys that you think are good players, but all of a sudden, if you're looking for a transfer, they're worried about their place, and now you're trying to keep your guys out of the portal while you're looking in the portal. So it's just all new optics and dynamics.
You think about when we are approaching the NFL draft, and there is a franchise longtime quarterback in place, and there are whispers that the franchise is looking to draft a quarterback, and you try and draw a parallel to college football, and we've really never had that parallel. The closest is if you're entrenched as a starter, like if you're Spencer Rattler and Oklahoma goes and gets Caleb Williams, but even then, you're 2 classes apart. Rattler could be off to the draft after this year. Now we finally have that, and in some cases, mere whispers about who's going in the portal and who may be transferring to fill-in-the-blank university. What you just mentioned is a dynamic that the transfer portal has now injected into college football that we never, and more specifically coaches, did not have to deal with 5 years ago.
Oh, well, I'm glad you mentioned Spencer Rattler. Steve has this was great. This was in San Antonio 2 years ago. Spencer Rattler, Oklahoma had to be very upfront with him about their plans for a transfer quarterback. They said, we're not going after Justin Fields, Spencer, because Justin Fields, when he hit the transfer market, he had multiple years left of eligibility. But we might go after somebody, and they ended up getting Jalen Hurts, who was only 1 year eligible. And I remember Steve talking to Spencer, and that was a very delicate balance. And I think Georgia might have had to do the same thing with its quarterbacks recently as they pursued JT Daniels.
That was one of those things where some in the media were trying to paint Lincoln Riley as a liar, and so Spencer Rattler had to go on the record and say, no, I knew Jalen Hurts was coming in, and so it's obviously worked out for Spencer right now, and he's happy, and he's QB1 there in Norman.
So let's kind of pivot here. We've talked about the SEC at length. We're going to kick it back to the SEC in due time. We've talked about the Big 12. We had early on Avonte Dickerson going to the West Coast from the Midwest. Avonte Dickerson committed to Oregon earlier. I wanted to go to the ACC because we haven't talked about the ACC a ton this morning, Steve, and we'll do it right now. As I'm pulling up the class rankings, I don't think it's any great mystery who the #1 program and the #1 overall recruiting class in this conference is right now. That would be the Clemson Tigers there with a strong class in the 290s right now. But then I look behind the Tigers, and we can talk about them to lead it off. The big story to me in the ACC has been for a couple of years now is always, how is the conference stacking up behind Clemson, and how wide is the gap between Clemson and the rest of the conference?
Well, I like North Carolina's class, the second best in the ACC. I know Miami's listed second there, and they have a strong class there that has a 4-star grade, but average ranking per commit, North Carolina's at 9102. Miami's at 94.8. So this North Carolina class and the way they've rebuilt it under Mack Brown and his staff, it has been incredible. The places where you win in football, they're loaded. Their quarterback room, with the one that they inherited when they got there, they turned it into one of the nation's best. First they flipped Sam Howell from Florida State, and now they land Drake May as the 5-star in this class. Their defensive line recruiting over the last 2 cycles is as good as anybody in America. They've added a ton of speed at wide receiver, in the running back room, and in the secondary, and a lot of physical second-level defenders. So this North Carolina football team is primed to compete for ACC championships moving forward, and if you do that, obviously you get a chance to get into the college football playoff.
Trey, when you talk about in-state recruiting, there is being good at recruiting your state, and then there's what Carolina has done. Quickly, if you pull up on 247Sports, 247sports.com, if you pull up the Carolina class and you look at guys who have signed, I'm just going to read down the list really quickly where they're from. North Carolina, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia. And then you go to enrollees. They're already there. North Carolina, I'm going to say NC for short. NC, South Carolina, North Carolina. That sounds like something you do on a video game. By the way, welcome back college football into the world of video games. But also, it's like, how in the world can you so thoroughly dominate in-state? And these are not afterthought type players. These are guys that a lot of major programs were after.
Absolutely. They're taking advantage of a historic year in the state of North Carolina. Of the top 10 kids from that state, UNC is signing 6 of them. And their company, Josh, you mentioned, ain't afterthoughts. Tennessee, Clemson, and Ohio State. Mack Brown has a title window coming up because Clemson's going to have 2 transition years at quarterback right now, and then whenever DJ Uiagalelei leaves. UNC's positioned with Sam Howell right now, and a few years down the road with Drake May. I'm a big Mack Brown guy. I'm very pleasantly surprised by what he's doing. I learned a lot from Steve Wiltfong. Did an interview with him a few months ago on our 247 Sports Social Distance show, talking to Mack about what he's learned in recruiting since his days at Texas, where Mack would load up his class by February's junior day and then kind of be done with it. And Mack was telling Steve that he's taken a slower approach to the process. He's not worried about flipping kids. Mack used to be very anti, hey, once a kid's committed somewhere, he's committed. I'm not going to worry about flips. He's doing that now with his quarterbacks. I love the class they're building, and I think they're set up to be a surging ACC power here.
Guys, the state of North Carolina was so good this year that I love NC State's class, number 33 nationally, but they get Michael Crowell, Jordan Poole, and Trevally Price from in-state. And you mentioned this about Iowa State earlier in the show, Trey. NC State returns darn near everybody. They had a bounce-back year this year. They've only won 10 games in a season, one time in program history. I think that NC State is one that could be on the cusp of winning double-digit games again with this class coming in. And the guy in that class I love is Caden Fordham, a linebacker out of Jacksonville Bulls, the powerhouse school in the Sunshine State. He's just a terrific 6'2", 220-pound second-level defender that I think is going to be outstanding for the Wolfpack.
So an accusation I get a lot on Late Kick is I don't talk about Clemson enough. And it's actually a credit to how good they are because there's such an assumption that they are entrenched as the #1 overall in the ACC that it's almost like you look at it and you say, well, there's really not a whole lot of point in talking about it. So I say that because I quickly felt our conversation going that way, and I know what the iJosh is going to be lit up with our fans, some of whom are my friends who are Clemson fans. So let me circle back. The Clemson Tigers class, currently ranked 5th overall. This is I won't say far and away. I'll put those words in your mouth, Steve. You can tell me how good it is. But I'm looking at them right now, #1 overall class in the ACC, #5 overall in the country, and we've kind of gotten used to this deal where we look at some classes where there are 24, 25 guys, and then we look at Clemson, and it seems like pretty much every year they got a lot of guys coming back. They can't afford to take a full class. This is another year where right now, I mean, you look at the overall numbers, they're not going to have 25 guys come in. Yet the ones who do, Tristan Lay kind of leads the pack there, which to me was a mild surprise at him picking them over Oklahoma. This class stacks up very favorably with what we've come to know from Clemson.
Yeah, and they need to replace Jackson Carman on that offensive line, and Tristan Lee, a 5-star with us, is a guy that has that kind of potential to come in and play early. He's going to stay home. His original plan was to enroll early, but his state, Virginia, is one of the states that didn't play high school football, so he's going to go get those game reps in the spring at his high school and then come into Clemson, I think, ready to compete from day one. And then defense at Clemson, it's such instinctual players that Brent Venables has flying around, and I think he went out and landed 3 guys that are among the most instinctual players in the country in Jeremiah Trotter, Barrett Carter, and Andrew Makuba. Those are going to be guys that make a ton of plays for Clemson over the course of their career. And Cade Denhoff and my man, his fellow defensive lineman.
Zaire?
Zaire.
Patterson.
Zaire Patterson, who's in our top 100. Thanks for helping me out. I mean, those are the kind of guys that are to the caliber of that epic defensive line haul that Clemson had in 2020. Zaire Patterson's a guy that can come in and push that room, and so that standard remains true. And then Will Shipley is your playmaker at running back that they may now really be counting on with the DeMarcus Bowman transfer, but Will Shipley can hurt you in a variety of ways. And so that's what I love about this Clemson class. Instinctual players on defense. Tristan Lee, maybe instant impact on the offensive line. More depth on the defensive front, and Will Shipley maybe bolstering that running back room on day one.
You could not possibly have a bigger dichotomy in recruiting approach from this Clemson signing class to the North Carolina signing class we just talked about. We mentioned basically every player other than a couple from North Carolina being from in-state. Trey, I'm scrolling down the list of Clemson signees in this class. I had to go all the way to the very end to find a kid from in-state. It's Will Taylor. He's a 3-star athlete from there at Dutch Fork, which is in the state of South Carolina. Outside of that, we got Texas, we got Tennessee, we got Florida, we got Virginia, Carolina, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. They go all over the place, which I think to me underscores the point that recruiting has never been more national. Like, state lines have never mattered less, because with the proliferation of technology, guys hop on every night and play Xbox with kids who are 3,000 miles away from them. It just doesn't feel like the country is nearly as big, and therefore guys are perfectly willing to uproot and head across the country. No problem. I'm going to Clemson to play my college football.
Yeah, I mean, the kid from Texas they signed, Andrew Makuba, committed sight unseen. He had never even been to Clemson when he committed. He just knew that much about the brand. And last year, when Clemson was getting this 2021 class started, it was starting out in California. Corey Foreman, he eventually decommitted, but they got a receiver out there too, Bo Collins. Those guys, Clemson's out here recruiting California, and they're doing it early in the cycle. I think that speaks to not only their brand, but who else they have on the roster, and DJ Uiagalelei, California kid too. But I think the more national, the better for Clemson. I think Clemson's offensive line this year, we talked about Tristan Lee. Their offensive line was a weak spot because they have not recruited very well there. They have a lot of kids in-state who are maybe questionable late takes. I don't see them doing that in this class. I think they're getting the best guys they can get.
I mean, they're just looking for guys that can maintain their excellent standards. So if it's not in-state, they're going to go elsewhere, and they're going to go get them.
What's really important, I think, to focus on here, and this is a program we haven't really talked about a lot this morning. You know, we mentioned Clemson, we mentioned North Carolina. Miami is currently 12th, Steve, in the overall top 24/7. And not only have they made, obviously, some noise on the recruiting trail, there have been back-to-back sort of mini overhauls of the assistant coaching lineup down there. And so initially, when Manny Diaz came in, everyone looked at his roster and said, ooh, he could be able to compete year one. And it didn't pan out that way. They lost a neutral site opener to Florida, and things kind of went off the rails a little bit. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't what people expected. And then this year, they kind of had what many thought to be a hollow year, where they were ranked high, but when they got a shot against Clemson, it was a blowout. And so people really don't look at Miami as having arrived by any stretch. Well, then we get into recruiting season. And you got guys like Leonard Taylor choosing to stay in South Florida. That's a guy who we've seen many times head off to Ohio State or Alabama. James Williams, another high 5-star type guy, a safety from South Florida. He, 6'5", by the way, 220 at safety. Jumbo. He stays in South Florida. And you got Jake Garcia coming in, so you're always looking for that staple quarterback. but this looks like a really healthy class and a really balanced class. There are a lot of different positions represented here.
Well, Leonard Taylor's a guy, they return a lot on their defensive line, but he's going to be a guy that comes in and instantly helps them. James Williams was one of the bigger shockers this cycle. Georgia considered the favorite for much of the process for him. 6'5", 218-pound, unique safety linebacker combo there, but they keep him at home and they land guys who can be playmakers at wideout like Romello Brinson, and then the transfer portal, Tyreek Stevenson, who showed a lot of promise at Georgia, a guy that we loved in the recruiting process. He's coming back home and should give Miami's defense a boost as well.
And Trey, so I want to just properly frame this. We're looking at what Florida's done in the transfer portal. I don't think if the need is there's any reason to doubt that Miami couldn't possibly be one of the biggest beneficiaries of this, because when you think about South Florida any given year, just by default, even if they landed the top 25 in South Florida, there are a lot of talented kids who leave South Florida. And so any given year, if we got guys that get out there, whether it go Tennessee, Texas A&M, whatever, and they just get homesick, it's really fortuitous of you to happen to be the major program that's in their backyard that they could default their way home to. So as much as we're talking about Florida right now, it could be that Miami becomes one of the most prime portal players in college football.
Josh, that's a great point. I hadn't even really thought of it that way. This is like the perfect storm for them. Bud Elliott writes a lot about the Sunshine State scorecard and how South Florida kids are leaving. They started to stick around a little bit more in this cycle. 2 of the top 4 are going to Miami, but the transfer portal, I mean, Manny Diaz was the big transfer portal winner last year. D'Eriq King and all those guys. Huge recruiting win, right, this year in getting D'Eriq King to come back.
Yep.
You mentioned Tyreek Stevenson, who they added. They also get Charleston Rambo from Oklahoma, one of the best names in college football and a really talented receiver. And they need receivers because the guys they have on their roster haven't quite panned out the way they want them to. But Miami returns a lot this year. They really only lose on offense Brevin Jordan. I'm excited to see the Hurricanes. Best wishes to D'Eriq King and his ACL recovery. That was unfortunate, but hey, I mean, they're getting close, and they're probably I would think that they keep looking in the transfer portal to see what else they can add because there's plenty out there.
It just says everything you need to know, Steve, about South Florida recruiting, that you could have guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, state of Florida in general, Aggie Hall. You have guys like Christian Leary leaving the state, and yet you can still have a borderline top 10 class by keeping more guys like Leonard Taylor home, James Williams home. And I think the key here, at least to me, is a guy like James Williams was recruited by all the big boys, and he chooses to stay home. And Leonard Taylor chooses to stay home. And in a lot of ways, you don't have the proven championship product yet there that you would in Columbus or Tuscaloosa. So what's important for Manny Diaz, if you're building a foundation, is those guys are not buying into results yet. They're buying into a vision, and those are the kind of guys you build a program around, and you're selling them on the recruiting trail to future classes.
Yeah, but you need more of the guys you lost. You look at Alabama, this best class ever. They go into the state of Florida, and they land the 2 best pass rushers. Dallas Turner, who was his other finalist? Georgia. Keanu Coate, who was his other finalist? He was committed to LSU. You land the 3 best receivers in the state. Aggie Hall, beat LSU for. Christian Leary, you beat Auburn for. And Ja'Cory Brooks, they did beat Florida for. But Florida and Miami, they need to be finalists more. And Florida State, too. You're not off the hook there in Tallahassee. But you guys need to find a way to keep the Dallas Turners and Keanu Coates of the world and these wideouts from being part of this Alabama reload, because then you got to play Alabama in the SEC championship game, and you don't have the same horses as them.
To give you an idea very quickly of what we've got coming up for you, about another hour, 10 minutes for us here. We've got Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lea up at the top of the hour. We're going to chat with him about a number of different things. Really fascinating dynamic there. We've also got the live commitment of Rajon Davis coming up in the next hour. So we've still got a long way to go. Here's what I'd love to do right now. So I'd love to just reset things. I know a lot of you shouldn't be, but you are at work with an earbud in, watching us on National Signing Day. Maybe you haven't been able to see the whole show. So to recap where the top classes stand, 1 through 10, again, has not changed all that much this morning, but some of you may not have looked this morning so far. So Alabama, Steve, the one thing that we were unsure of when we came on air that we do know now, and that is Alabama, not only are they going to have the top class in this cycle, with Kamar Wheaton staying in the house, they are going to have the top-rated class of all time. And as we see 1 through 10 here, Steve Wiltfong, again, biggest takeaways as we sort of hit the reset button.
Well, you have Oregon adding Avonte Dickerson and solidifying the #1 recruiting class in the Pac-12 for a third straight year for Mario Cristobal and company. Still a lot of chance for movement for Texas A&M as they're in the mix for 3 top 100 guys: L.J. Johnson, Tywan Malone, and Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas not expected to decide today, but JoJo Earle wasn't expected to sign with Alabama when he did in the early signing period, so you never know if you're going to get a signing day surprise there. We haven't talked much about Notre Dame today. They have a player in their class, Logan Diggs, a running back from Louisiana who hasn't signed yet. They want to get him in the fold and finish up a class that finishes number 9, or that's at number 9 nationally. This is your pretty standard Notre Dame class. Terrific on the offensive line. I think receiver was a big need for the Irish here in this cycle. As you saw in the game against Clemson, they just didn't have the firepower at wideout to go toe-to-toe with them again. But Lorenzo Styles and Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey are guys that I think they've won with in the past. So Notre Dame offensive line recruiting, good receiver recruiting, and Prince Colley, a guy that can maybe come in and give them what they got out of Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoah on defense.
A reminder again, the Rajon Davis commitment coming up in the next hour. We actually have, some elements, some things to maybe get you caught up on these players if you don't already know a lot about them. Let's actually begin to introduce you to Rajon Davis as we prepare for his commitment in the next hour.
Rajon Davis, one of the top linebackers, not just locally, but nationally. Really love his all-around game. To me, he's kind of a modern-day linebacker, the way he can run, the way he can cover. Actually covers like a hybrid safety, and I think that's how he will be used at the next level. Really good playing in space, very athletic kid, but he's really good at it, just being able to make plays in space. Right now, just took a visit to Ohio State. Really liked that trip a lot. Going into that trip, I thought he was a pretty heavy USC lean. Oregon still trying. LSU, where he originally was committed to. Battle for Mr. Rajon Davis.
And again, the commitment of Rajon Davis coming up in the next hour. Earlier this morning, right as we went on air, we welcomed in Avonte Dickerson, the 6', 170-pound corner out of Omaha, Nebraska. He committed to the University of Oregon.
I would be taking my talents to the University of Oregon.
And then about an hour later, we welcomed in Davon Townley, 6'6", 220-pound defensive end out of Minneapolis. If you missed that one just a little while ago, here's how it went down.
I'm excited to announce that I will be playing football for Coach Franklin at Penn State. Go Lions.
And so congratulations to everyone. Again, Rajon Davis still have a commitment left to come. And after we go off the air, there are still some more big commitments. And it's fascinating. Steve, we're watching the finished product here. Like, there are so many people in Stamford, Connecticut, for example, here in Brentwood, all across the country that are making this happen from a technical perspective, as well as the high school coaches, the parents, the players on the ground. So I would need a 5-hour show easily to list all of you. Thank you so much if you're involved in that. But as we reset it, I asked you this morning, we pull in the parking lot. You were 2 minutes late, by the way. Avonte Dickerson, what do we think? You said Oregon. We got Oregon. I asked you, Townley, what do we think? You said Penn State. We got Penn State. And so no big surprise there. As we sort of look ahead, and we have some time to do this now, Rajon Davis in the next hour, that's a big name out on the West Coast. We're going to talk to Greg Biggins in a little while about him. What are our thoughts right now on that linebacker?
Well, his finalists are USC, Ohio State, and Oregon, and we like USC ever since even before he decommitted from LSU late in the process. It seemed like the Trojans have moved into the driver's seat for him. USC has done everything that the Rajon Davis camp asked of them this year. Show promise on the field where they go to the Pac-12 title game. Recruit difference makers around me on defense, and they're able to do that with Corey Foreman and Julian Simon and Jay Toya, and bring in a new staff of guys that can make an impact on defense, and they do that. So I think proximity history, play on the field in this recruiting class has put USC in a good position to land Rajon Davis, but he did take a late visit to Ohio State. I think he loves the culture in Columbus. I think he fits in with the guys in Ohio State's locker room and knows some of them. And Al Washington, another terrific recruiter at Ohio State who's been on Rajon for a long time, has the Buckeyes in the middle of this one. I think that Oregon, their class is JT or bust at this point. I think they're saving their final scholarship for the big guy. So I think that I think this is down to USC and Ohio State, and I like the Trojans going into the announcement.
Steve, let me ask you this. So when we look at the way that classes and coaching staffs are choosing to structure their classes, how popular a talking point is it right now to actively save room, even though you know you could take more guys, saving room for the transfer portal? We've heard, for instance, Ed Orgeron at LSU just publicly making his plans known. I want to save 2 or 3 spots for the transfer portal. Other coaching staffs, you may not get that kind of honesty out of, but yet to some degree, it's on everyone's radar.
Well, it just depends on the level you're recruiting. I mean, if you can take a high school guy that you think is going to be a difference maker for you, typically you're going to lean that way. But maybe you're 11-1 this year and you need to shore up a cornerback that left for the NFL draft, so you need to save it for a corner. So you have to balance those optics and just really have a good pulse of your roster, which goes back to what we talked about earlier, having a guy on your staff that's managing your roster and making sure that you know where you may be weak in the next coming year or two, so then you know your plan of attack. Are we going to attack this through high school recruiting, or are we going to try and get this solved quickly through the portal?
Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lea joining us in just a couple of minutes here. Interested to talk to him. But again, you know, I don't think this is a topic that's going away. This is something that you and I and pretty much everyone can talk about as we get into the offseason. The difference in personnel roles where it comes to high school scouting. You always had that. JUCO scouting, you always had that. But now the need to actually have someone tasked with scouting FCS, FBS, because a lot of those guys are going in the transfer portal. Maybe prioritizing acquisition type guys instead of having low 5-figure salaries. They bump up into that 6-figure range. It's something that would have sounded crazy 5 years ago. But yet this entire day and the way it looks would have sounded crazy and looked crazy 5 years ago. And so it's always the guys that are willing to adapt and stay at the forefront of that evolution that end up staying on top of the game, and we see them when we look at our top 5.
Well, who was the first guy that Ryan Day thanked for their class on the show? It was Mark Pantoni. And I remember earlier in Mark Pantoni's career, it was his job to message Raekwon McMillan, one of his many assignments to message Raekwon McMillan every day, the prize linebacker out of the state of Georgia, who they beat the SEC powerhouses for. That role has evolved with off-field recruiting guys and their impact that they're having on landing recruits and bring talent acquisition. And I think that you're going to see more programs bring a guy on staff, whether it's that 10th assistant coach or an off-field guy where it's their sole job. Maybe what Vinny Serrato did for Notre Dame back in the 80s and early 90s, just go out, get us the players, and we'll win with them.
And we're looking at our top 5 here as we get set to welcome in Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lea in just a second. It's the usual suspects there. It's Bama, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, and Clemson 1 through 5. I know there's a lot of talk just outside of that top 5 about Texas A&M. We're talking about teams and have all morning with the most to gain. And I think, Steve, that'll probably be a theme throughout the rest of this show and the rest of the day, as we're going to have a lot of guys outside of maybe the A&M sphere, guys like Terry and Arnold even, that are still on the board to where, you know, we can't necessarily call winners and losers by high noon on the East Coast on a day like this.
Well, I just got a text from Brian Doan, our lead East Coast analyst, he's hopping in the car to go over to Taiwan Malone's announcement. I think that was one that we would have liked to have had figured out and have the story written and ready to go prior to his announcement. But this one's going down to the wire between Ole Miss and Texas A&M, maybe Florida State in there as the third school. And Brian Doan, he's about to be boots on the ground for us for what is shaping up to be one of the tighter recruitments of the day.
And over the last 24 hours, we thought coming into the week we may hear a final decision from high 4-star wide receiver talent, Brian Thomas, out of Louisiana. Well, as of the last 24 hours, Billy Embody and the guys at Go247.com confirming, nope, probably not going to hear one today. And so, you know, you're privy to some of the inner workings, the behind-the-scenes mechanisms that go into a recruiting process. Maybe not that one specifically if you don't want to, but just in general, what makes those sorts of things change in the last 24 to 48 hours?
Well, I think anytime you are talking to guys like Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and Ed Orgeron or Ryan Day, Dabo Swinney. Those guys didn't get to where they're at in college football by accident. They're commanding guys that you may think you know something, but then you're another conversation away with those guys of it just being muddied again for you. And so these decisions are incredibly challenging when you're dealing with men like that that have risen through college football and can be very persuasive about their school. And just even for if you're buying a house or buying a car, you may go back and forth between your options. But now you're selecting a school, and not only are you selecting a school, but you have guys that you would put on the Mount Rushmore of college football right now trying to convince you to come to their place. Makes the decision awfully hard.
And it's kind of interesting, Steve, when you mention a guy like Brian Thomas. Let me circle back in and zoom in on Brian Thomas. So the thinking all along has been the three major players there in no given order. It's A&M, it's Alabama, it's LSU. So let me ask you, as if I just walked in the room, are those still the three finalists? And is there any kind of shifting in the order, so to speak, that you think they line up in?
Well, I think during the fall, Alabama looked like the team to beat. They have 4 receivers committed. Generally, if you are signing up to play for Alabama, you don't really care much about the competition, who's already in your class, who's already in the room. Alabama, you just expect that standard. But I think this has turned more into an LSU Texas A&M battle. Texas A&M's always kind of been the steady program in this recruitment. Tommy Robinson and Coach Craig and those guys have done a nice job with Brian Thomas, and I think there's people in his family very comfortable with him going to College Station. But I also think LSU, who was in third going into the early signing period, I think they've risen. Mickey Joseph has led the charge in that recruitment, and I think they've got some ground there. And I think the idea of staying closer to home and playing for LSU has also been real enticing, and so it's made it tight. And I think that Brian Thomas and his family are trying to get some final questions answered here with their process, and it seems like the schools that are recruiting him aren't giving him the hard deadline of today or no. So he can take his time with it and continue on through the process.
Waiting on Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lea. Trey, I know you guys over on the desk side of things, you've written a ton about the quarterback position every single year. And as we take a peek at the top overall quarterback rankings for this particular cycle, you've got Caleb Williams there kind of as a lead recruiter, as a player lead recruiter for that Oklahoma class. Brock Vandergriff has kind of played the same role for that Georgia class. You look at the overall dual threat, the overall pro style. Sam Heward, we talked about Washington being able to keep him or bring him, keep him in state. And also J.J. McCarthy, which is a cornerstone piece of the Michigan class. Just overall, not necessarily year to year, but overall, what's been the feel? What's gotten the most traction out of this quarterback class for you guys?
It's always figuring out which one of these guys has the best chance to play early. Caleb Williams won't play this year. Spencer Rattler's there. Sam Heward, I think, could play early for Washington. J.J. McCarthy, I think, should play early for Michigan. I think Jim Harbaugh has to realize, throw your fans something, man. Throw them some red meat. Give them a 5-star true freshman quarterback out there on the field in week 1. Build around that, and maybe it's a good excuse if you struggle the first few weeks. Kyle McCord, that'll be an interesting quarterback battle at Ohio State. I think that's C.J. Stroud's job to lose. He'll factor in there, too. Ty Thompson, I think Oregon has something to figure out at quarterback. Tyler Shuck and Anthony Brown are coming back. Why can't Ty Thompson factor in there? Jake Garcia will sit behind Eric King. I think future's Drake Mays at North Carolina, Tyler Buckner at Notre Dame, and Jackson Dart at USC. I think we've got some guys who, even if they might not be playing this fall, I think the roadmap is very short. I think we could see the class of 2021 quarterbacks making their impact largely as early as 2022.
How about a guy like Coach Sweeney, who's had these quarterbacks, these blue chip quarterbacks come in every other year? He gets that young guy meaningful snaps in the first half. We saw that with Trevor Lawrence early in his career. We obviously saw that with DJ this year. I wonder if we'll see some of that with some of the guys that Trey just rattled off. You see a Jackson Dart get in there a little bit, or a Miller Moss, even though Keaton Slovis is your starter. But getting that next guy some viable pressure cooker reps just in case you got to pivot to him later in the year.
I think when Justin Herbert was at Oregon, he was always looked at as a guy who maybe would have more production at the NFL level than he even did at the college level. And then we talked about Tyler Shuck and the incoming true freshman, Ty Thompson. I think for my money, as we look at everyone on this list, that's the guy who could have the most transformational impact, because when we're talking about Caleb Williams, quarterback's already established at Oklahoma. when we're talking about in any given year, a place like Alabama or a place like Clemson, quarterback's already established there. Trey, we have not looked at the University of Oregon over the past several years and looked out there and said, they've got a true superstar quarterback putting up superstar numbers, the likes of which you see at the other major powers in America. And if Ty Thompson is able to be that, we've seen the recruiting infusion that being elite at quarterback can give you. Oregon doesn't need a whole lot of help. They're already our number 6 overall class. But if Ty Thompson just ends up being a breakout player as a true freshman, imagine the kind of overdrive that puts the Oregon recruiting machine into, and also the perspective that may change from the Pac-12 and Oregon on a national level.
Oregon has plenty of talent at every other position. You figure out quarterback, the Pac-12 is yours.
Penn State hit their stride on offense in year 2 of the Joe Moorhead era. Maybe Oregon does the same. Really
interesting. So let's go all the way from Eugene, Oregon, right into our backyard. Let's come back home to Nashville, Tennessee. Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lea joining us. And it's a really interesting day. So, Coach, we've talked to some guys who have been at their stops for several years. You haven't even been at Vanderbilt several months yet. And so, in a lot of ways, it's got to be like drinking from a fire hose this first signing day. How hectic is this, and what does it feel like overall?
Well, listen, it's a great honor. And though I've only been here as the head coach for, a couple weeks, this is home and this is my alma mater. So I'm very familiar with, this program and this university and this city. So in some ways I'm learning a new role here, and that is, like you said, quite the process. But on the flip side of that, I'm very comfortable and excited to be here and honored to be on the show.
Coach Lea, just talk about the recipe that you think you guys have to have on the recruiting trail to get this thing going here.
Well, we've been very deliberate in hiring this staff and in, trying to establish a scouting and recruiting office that, can really revolutionize the way that Vanderbilt recruits. And fortunately, I was able to grab one of your colleagues, Barton Simmons, to head up that effort. And I think his expertise and the time he spent in recruiting as an analyst and as a scout for 247 will serve us well. And then he's obviously learning the ins and outs of recruiting in college football from the university perspective too. But we've tried to kind of insulate that department so that really we're making decisions in recruiting that identify the raw material that we need to be successful. We want to field this program with NFL talent, and we know that we'll have to be developmental in nature, and that is a program ethos. It's from the strength program to the position coaches, fundamental technical development, from my seat in terms of the mental development and the discipline inherent in this program, that we take the raw material and we develop it into NFL potential. And that is important. Another important part at Vanderbilt is the fit. And we feel like in the league, we're an outlier. And I don't see that as a disadvantage. In fact, I think it's the one thing that distinguishes us from everybody else. And so how quickly we can identify the people that are the prospects that are shopping down our aisle, the guys that are looking for an environment where they don't have to compromise on academics or athletics, that they can reach for heights in both areas. And when you field a team with that level of person, with that level of player, you all of a sudden have an environment of high-reaching, high-achieving young people that, again, with the program ethos of development-based, we feel like there's an incredible opportunity to optimize this niche and to make it a strategic advantage for us.
Coach, you have had your name involved in the running for head jobs for several years now. This is the one that you jumped at. It's in the SEC. It is your home. And so you feel a different way about Vanderbilt probably than pretty much anyone else that they could have ever gotten there. Here's what I'm very interested in. If you have aspirations to be a head coach, you've got to have, whether it's sketched on a pizza box or loaded in a fancy Excel spreadsheet, you've got to have the structure that if you ever got the job, you'd want to put in place. Well, now you're there. How different has the process been of building your entire infrastructure versus how you thought it would be before you ever got a head job?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, you always are kind of formulating what this will look like and what a staff will look like. And I think that's evolved for me over time. I mean, I think the nature of college football, the landscape has changed, and the way we recruit and identify talent has changed. And there's so many conveniences now that weren't available to us 10 years ago, but there are also pressures that we need to insulate ourselves from to make sure we're making long-term decisions. And I think for me, I had a pretty clear vision of what I wanted the structure to be, independent of what the program was I was taking over. Being that it's Vanderbilt, I think I have a little more intimate knowledge as to what success will look like here. And so, executing on that structure is one thing. Like delineating the offices and the office spaces is one thing. Filling those spaces with, competent, capable people who are going to build into a team vision, who are going to provide inspiration to a program, and approach their work with enthusiasm and spirit every day. That's been the challenge, and that's where I've tried to take as much time as I can to ensure that the future of this program, which depends upon the heartbeats of the men in those offices and women, the future of this program's in good hands. And this has always been to me about a 20-year vision of sustained success. This is something where I want this to be a job that's a legacy job. I mean, this place is so important to me and so important to so many of my former teammates that to take the time on the front end to make sure the structure and the systems are in place, and then to be able to watch those structures and systems deliver the product that will allow us to reach the potential of the program. That's what gets me up and gets me excited every single day.
Coach, over the course of your career, you've had some big-time evaluation hits. Jesse Bates at Wake Forest, an unknown recruit out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoah wins the Buckus Award this past year. He was just a three-star recruit out of Virginia. For you as the head coach now, how much will you be part of evaluating guys like that and making sure they're priorities on your board? And then where do you feel like you fit in as far as trying to lure guys like that to Vanderbilt alongside your assistants?
Well, listen, I'm going to serve a critical role in both areas. I mean, I think one reason that it was so important for me to centralize the recruiting efforts was so that I can make sure that I'm involved in every decision we make from a standpoint of who we allow into this program, who we recruit into this program. And again, part of that is just strategic because we want to make sure that, recruiting is a tricky thing. I mean, there are a lot of influences in a decision process to decide to offer a recruit or certainly to take a commitment from a recruit. And for me, I wanted to try to do the best we can to strip away some of the subjective measures and make sure that we're focused on the things that count most. And that's, the character assessments, the personality of the recruit, how they engage in the process, and then how they'll fit within the expectation standards of our program. And then, like I said, certainly a focus on those measurable traits that we can know exactly the raw material, exactly what the skill set is that we're taking on, that we can develop it. And then from there, my role in recruiting, for me, I want to be a reason, a part of this process for a prospect. They understand that this is my alma mater, that they understand that this is a football program that I worked for and sacrificed for as a student athlete. And they know that my vision here goes long past their 4 years. And I think within that, what better way to start a relationship to say, like, I'm going to be your coach. I'm going to be here to see you through your process. The success of this program, the long-term success of this program is really important. And so how we develop those relationships and how I involve myself, to me, becomes a critical factor in signing the right kind of guys.
Vanderbilt head coach Clark Lea. Coach, we sincerely appreciate you taking time out of what I know to be a busy day to join us. Go play a tune or two on that guitar and have yourself a great rest of your Wednesday.
Let me assure you that that's just that's decoration. I don't know. I don't have any ability, although I could probably get with my good friend Rick Neuheisel and he can show me a thing or two, but that'll be for another day.
Yeah, that's cool. These two laptop screens in front of me serve the same purpose. We appreciate it, Coach. So as we exit Clark Lea there, we look at the 2021 overall SEC class standings. And Steve, obviously you're not going to see Vanderbilt there, but then again, I don't think they were under the illusion that you were. He's talking about the different kind of process, the different kind of player. But as we kick it back up to the top there, I guess the one thing that's changed, and aesthetically it hasn't, Alabama's still number one, but the one thing that's changed from when you and I and Trey sat down here this morning is not only can we confirm Alabama number one, we can also confirm with the acquisition of Kamar Wheaton, or the, I guess, signature of Kamar Wheaton, Alabama's going to have the top-rated class of all time. And I know we've talked about it a couple of times. I don't think you can hammer that point home enough.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just maintaining the standard that they have there in Alabama, and they really need to reload. Again, we talked about that 2017 recruiting class earlier in the show and what they brought to that Alabama program. Those guys are now gone, and this class, obviously with the ones before it, is going to be integral in fixing that. Alabama's finished with the #1 ranked recruiting class now 9 times in the last 11 years, and so they're prepared to reload. But this 2022 or 2021 class, they're counting on the offensive line position and maybe guys that are coming in at receiver and corner to provide some immediate impact for them in addition to what they've recruited in the past.
Let's kick it to Georgia for just a second. Georgia, it was a really good, well, it's always a really good year in state for the University of Georgia, and being in a talent-rich state is something they've taken advantage of again this year. Amarius Mims is the top overall rated signee they have there, but also if you talk about Brock Vandagriff, they just so happen to seem to always have 5-star quarterbacks just down the road. Xavier Sori is a guy they go down to Bradenton to get out of IMG, but then they stayed in state for a guy like Smell Munden, and these are all names, Steve, that you and I talked about on the whip around every week for months. And now we see them signing with the University of Georgia. It's the #3 overall class in America at the moment. What are your general takeaways?
Yeah, and one of the names you don't see on there is a 5-star with us in the top 247, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. Georgia's finished in the top 3 now. This is going to be a 5th straight year for the Bulldogs if they hold on at #3. They're still battling for Terrion Arnold here alongside Alabama. Defensive back was the biggest need for Georgia this cycle with what they've lost through the NFL draft and just attrition. And Nyland Green, a 5-star cornerback from Covington, Georgia, Newton High, was as pivotal a recruiting win as any program had in the country. And if you can add Terrion Green to Nyland Green, all of a sudden Georgia's reloading at a high level at maybe their biggest position of need here in 2021.
Here's what's fascinating. If you were to be an Oregon State fan, let's say, and you were watching recruiting as a whole, you look at the way Georgia recruits, and they're top 5 every year, top 3 every year, you would think, I can't even imagine, that's on a different planet than anything I've been used to. And yet, if you're a Georgia Bulldog fan, you're looking at your class and you're thinking, this is really good, this is really good. Then you cut your eyes over to Tuscaloosa, and you cut your eyes up to Clemson, and you cut your eyes up to Columbus. Again, when we were talking about Ohio State, Georgia lives in that same world. And so you can look at it as being totally elite, which they are every year. But Trey, you know, because we write about it all the time, we talk about it all the time on the College Football Daily, you're mentioning it all the time. It's about where we are in relation to where they are. And right now, as good as this class is, I mean, it's not even the top class in the SEC, just to give you an idea of what the waters in the SEC are like.
Well, that's a low blow to mention Oregon State. They came in to the day with the number 117th ranked class. For Georgia, I mean, this is a great class. You talk about how does it compare to the other classes. I thought it was interesting this year when we came out with the 247 Sports team talent composite. Georgia had the best roster in college football. Georgia's always going to have the best roster in college football as long as Kirby Smart's the head man. Defensive line, loaded. Running back, loaded. Starting to get receivers. They're reloading in the secondary. I think Nyland Green could play immediately alongside the likes of Kelee Ringo, Jalen Kimber. Quarterback is the missing piece. We say that every year. Josh, you talked about that last week on Late Kick. I think JT Daniels is going to have a big year. I think Brock Vandagriff's going to be the guy in 2021. I think Georgia's knocking on the door here, and even if this class is 3rd and they wish it was 1 or they wish it was 2, it's enough, and I think they have closed any sort of perceived talent gap there is with Alabama.
The only step, Steve, well, to me, the only step left to take is, Trey was just talking about it. Everyone down in Georgia is talking about it. If JT Daniels has the kind of year just that they expect him to have in 2021, same deal with Oregon. Once we, as players, as recruits, as fans, once we're able to look and we finally say, okay, that place has elite quarterback play. Like we know Ohio State has it, we know Alabama has it. That place, Georgia, now they've got elite quarterback play to go along with everything else. All of a sudden, you get to a point as a program where maybe they're the ones snapping their fingers and signing the kind of receiver class like Alabama's signing right now, to where it's no longer any kind of rebuild. We're maximizing the potential of the talent we have on campus. You can come here as a wide receiver. You know it's 3 and out to the NFL. If Georgia becomes that, they're already a perennial player, but they're at the forefront of the national title conversation if that happens.
The 2 times Alabama hasn't won the 247 Sports Recruiting Championship in the last 11 years, it was Georgia. And the Bulldogs have played Alabama tough on the field. They haven't gotten over the hump, but they've been in those ball games, and they're continuing to recruit at a standard that will allow them to be competitive with Alabama and maybe ultimately win the SEC if they hit big on quarterback like Trey mentioned. And I think they have the identity that they're recruiting at the position. Obviously, they have JT Daniels through the portal, but you're bringing in Brock Vandegrift, and then you already have 5-star Gunnar Stockton committed in 2022. I think you have 3 guys that would be seamless transitions in Coach Monken's offense moving forward. And so I think now they've established their identity under center. They've recruited terrifically in every other position room. They have NFL guys across the board. And I mean, Georgia's not going anywhere with the way they've recruited.
Yeah, so here's the one knock. It's not really a knock. It's just kind of, I guess, something that's left open to speculation. When you guys start diving deep and you're in the scouting process, the evaluation and rankings process, I've listened in on those calls, and they can get pretty heated, and it's not that everyone hates each other. It's just that there are differing opinions. A guy like Brock Vandegrift, a guy that did not play 6A ball in the state of Georgia, whatever the case may be, how do you sometimes weigh the competition level versus the obvious talent level?
Well, we've had a chance to get some live evaluations on Brock Vandegrift, and he was actually one of the recruits that there was some back and forth on is he a 5-star, is he not? And some people agreed, some people disagreed. I know Brock Vandegrift was the top quarterback target on several college boards. I know he was the #1 quarterback target on Lincoln Riley's board and was committed to the Sooners, and now he's at Georgia. He was the #1 quarterback target on Georgia's board, and he's a young man that we saw, yes, he's torching a small competition in the state of Georgia, but saw him at the Elite 11 finals, and I thought he was, outside of maybe Caleb Williams in that setting, the most physically gifted quarterback in that venue with the speed, the pace he played at, the athleticism he displays, and the arm talent he had. And so if I'm Georgia, I'm really excited about Brock Vandegrift, and I think he is a quarterback that has all the tools and traits to take him to the promised land.
We talked about LSU this morning. We've already talked about Texas A&M a great deal. We hit on Florida. You know who we haven't talked about is Tennessee. And Tennessee, you've got a coaching transition there. A lot of guys, there's been this mass exodus to the transfer portal. And you may wonder, if you haven't already looked at the team rankings, you may think, where's Tennessee? 35, 40, 50. Tennessee's got the 16th class in America right now. And Steve, I think from an outsider's perspective, that's probably a mild to moderate surprise.
Yeah, well, I think that they were able to get some guys signed and enrolled. Yep. They got 11 guys enrolled, including Caden Salter, who's one of the top quarterbacks in this cycle, led his Cedar Hill team to a deep run in the Lone Star State playoffs. And I think he was one of the more pivotal recruits in this class because coming into the year, Tennessee had the #10 recruiting class last year. They had like an 8-game winning streak. You think this program's right on the cusp of breaking through, and they need to solidify their quarterback room, and you think they're just a transfer away to bridge the gap to Caden Salter, and you got this thing rocking and rolling. But that's not the Tennessee that we know today. But they still recruited some pretty good players that they enrolled early. Aaron Willis, a linebacker from Baltimore St. Francis. Walker Merrill, a playmaking receiver from in-state, to name a few, alongside Caden Salter. But now they're going into some uncharted waters, and we'll see what hand Tennessee's dealt here in the near future.
One of the other programs in the SEC to hit on right quick, we have the commitment of Rajon Davis coming up. We're also going to talk to Greg Biggins. But Ole Miss, they're a program that you and I have spoken about a lot. It's also a program that you have highlighted as a program with maybe the most to gain. Listen, Steve, if you're an outsider, casual fan, I think a lot of people will be surprised to see Ole Miss parked inside the top 20 right now.
Man, I kind of really like this Ole Miss class, the way they built it up this cycle, similar to what North Carolina and Mac Brown have done. Ole Miss, they can't stop anybody this year, right? Well, the strength of this class is on the defensive side of the football, particularly in the secondary. Tysheen Johnson, I think, is a guy that they see could have a Jabril Peppers type impact for them. MJ Daniels is one of the more promising cornerback prospects in this class, 6'3". They flip from Mississippi State and hold off Texas A&M for him. Markevius Brown is a defensive back that can run. And if they can add Tywone Malone to what they've recruited on the defensive line, this is a huge win. And all of a sudden, Ole Miss's defense has been completely restructured, and now you're just trying to build on that in 2022. But you have a nucleus now that you think you can win a lot of SEC games with.
So let's zoom it out now again to recap and give you the current up to the second picture of the SEC standings. Of course, it's very familiar at the top. You've got Alabama, you've got Georgia there, LSU, Texas A&M probably still with some moves to be made. Florida is attacking recruiting and the transfer portal simultaneously. We just mentioned the Vols, and then Ole Miss, Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi round out the top 10. That is the southeastern picture, but now we want to kick it all the way across the country to the West Coast. We're getting ready for the commitment live right here on the 247 Sports National Signing Day show of Rajon Davis. But before we do that, Greg Biggins, I wanted to bring in. Biggins has been all over this recruitment and a number of recruitments out that way. Greg, to just get us started this morning, it's a lot earlier where you are than where we are. So good morning, kind sir.
Good morning.
Get us set. The Rajon Davis commitment and recruitment in a snapshot. What are we looking at?
So I'll try to be quick, but not hurrying. So early commit to LSU, backed off, kind of had a final five of Ohio State, Oregon, USC, Vanderbilt. The Fighting Barton Simmons got in there late. And obviously, like I mentioned, LSU as well. I think it kind of came down to three schools. Don't want to give too much away right now, but I do think it kind of came down to the Oregon Ducks, Ohio State, USC. He visited Ohio State 2 weeks ago. I had a great visit with his family, and here we are today.
And we are ready to go to Rajon Davis. Been really excited about this commitment. I know, again, we've got some friends on the West Coast up very early, and so we're going to get ready for the Rajon Davis commitment. Again, this is a 6'1", 215-pound linebacker out of Santa Ana, California. USC heavily trending here. Steve, I know that USC has been a factor in this recruitment for quite a while. But, you know, I always ask you, you got the crystal ball, but then I have my own off-the-record crystal ball with you, which is the super secret crystal ball. And I ask you degrees of confidence. And you have never told me this is a done deal. It's a slam dunk. And this one's not either. So, I mean, we kind of wait along with everyone else.
Yeah, I think that there's been some legit challengers for Rajon Davis, as Greg alluded to. Anytime Ohio State is in the mix, you cannot rule the Buckeyes out, especially if they're getting a late visit. And for the reasons why he committed to LSU early in the process, I think that he saw a lot of those things at Ohio State, a program that is right in the mix to win the national championship right now, with the culture that I fit into, with players that I'd like to play alongside. But I think that USC has given him a lot of reasons to stay home, and that's why they're the 247 Sports Crystal Ball favorite. And I think guys like Dante Williams and Gavin Morris have done a good job of keeping USC warm till they were able to get hot on the field this year, and they were able to recruit some guys that he would maybe want to play with, the Corey Foremans and Jay Toyas of the world, and now we'll see here in the next minute what he's going to do.
Rajon Davis, again, a live commitment coming up momentarily. Let's get you set. Here is the player profile.
Rajon Davis, one of the top linebackers, not just locally but nationally. Really love his all-around game. To me, he's kind of a modern-day linebacker, the way he can run, the way he can cover. Actually covers like a hybrid safety, and I think that's how he will be used at the next level. Really good playing in space, very athletic kid, but he's really good at it, just being able to make plays in space. Right now, just took a visit to Ohio State. Really liked that trip a lot. Going into that trip, I thought he was a pretty heavy USC lean. Oregon still trying. LSU, where he originally was committed to. Battle for Mr. Rajon Davis.
And we're ready to go live now to Rajon Davis, Santa Ana, California. I always put the T in there because I'm from the South, even though there's not one in the word. Rajon, we're really excited to have you first off. So thank you for joining us this morning. And before we get your live commitment, I've asked everyone so far this morning, I want to ask you, no recruiting class has ever been through the process that you guys have been through because of COVID. Please take us through what this has been like for you personally.
Really, it's just been crazy, just going through everything, not being able to take your official visits, and just not being able to go to see the schools and meet the coaches. So I mean, that's been a pretty bad thing, and hopefully in the future, the rest of the classes are able to do that.
So here we are. We're finally at the finish line. We can all take a deep breath and just settle in. We're about to get your live commitment. Before I get it from you, I want to ask you, you know where you're about to go. We're about to find out. How long have you known what your final destination was going to be?
Really, it's been a few days. Like, I would say probably 1 or 2 days since I've known. But it was a pretty hard decision, you know, just thinking of everything and going through everything, listening to everything out. Like, I would say it was a pretty hard decision.
All right, here we go. Rajon Davis, the floor is yours, my man. Make your commitment.
First off, I would like to thank God, and I'd like to thank my parents for everything they've done. And just like to thank my whole support system, just getting me where I am today and making me the person I am. With that being said, for the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be taking my talents to the University of Southern California.
Yes, sir.
So Rajon Davis making it official. He is going to be a USC Trojan. Obviously, a lot of celebration there with the parents. Obviously, a lot of celebration right there at the school. But also, I got to imagine a lot of celebration in the hallways of the USC athletic department. So, Rajon, now that we know where you're going, and now that we know you're going to be a Trojan, tell me what it was that stood out about USC that kept you on the West Coast.
Really just, being able to play early, being able to come in, work, and I see where the program is going. It looks like it's going in a great direction. And I just like the whole new defensive scheme that they have going. And I feel like I'll fit really well into it. So that's why I made the decision.
Yeah, Rajon, you talk about the direction the program's going in. Just talk about the potential that you guys in this 2021 class are infusing into USC football.
I would say just, going off of what last year, just taking off of what they were doing, just with speed and physicality. They look like they're bringing back the old SC, so that's what we plan on doing for the next few years.
This is a class, Rajon, that was already ranked inside the top 10. You do nothing but bolster that ranking. When you've talked to head coach Clay Helton and you've talked to the recruiters on that staff, what's the message that they give you, and overall, what's your mentality coming in there?
Really, we just coming in to work and hit hard and be physical. That's how we come and play fast, play hard, and play physical. That's what our motto will be for the next 2 years. So we coming to win championships. That's what it'll be.
Rajon, describe your style of play. What are people going to see from you as you patrol USC's defense?
Just running, hitting, and playing fast. That's all I'll do. I'll listen to what the coach tells me, and then we're just going to take it from there with a lot of film.
Rajon Davis, huge morning out on the West Coast, huge morning for USC and for you as well. Congratulations, and we appreciate you joining us this morning. Good luck in your future at USC.
Thank you. Fight on.
So now we can kick it as we go to the full screen here. We look at the recruiting overview, and we bring Greg Biggins back in again. This was a class that was already ranked inside the top 10, and Greg, this is what everyone at USC was looking forward to this morning. Do we lock it up with Rajon Davis? The answer now is yes. How does this class stack up to you?
I mean, I love the class. Obviously, at number 2. So I think if we're getting ready to say, is USC back just yet? I remember the Pete Carroll days where they were competing, in the top 3, top 4. So, but compared to last year, where they were, it's crazy to say, 10th out of the 12 Pac-12 schools. Now they're in the top 10 this year. Signed 5 of the top 10 players in California last year, just signed 2 of the top 20 players in California. So really nice job this year of rallying on the field and obviously in recruiting, and kind of similar to Corey Foreman. I think the 2 top commitments in the 247Sports composite, Rajon and Corey Foreman, were originally committed elsewhere. LSU for Rajon and Clemson for Corey. I think they both had some questions about stability, about development, and I think they both kind of felt like, the team is going in the right direction right now. We like the coaching staff, the new defensive staff. I think Steve mentioned Dante Williams, Vic Soto, Michael Hutchins, Todd Orlando. Those guys are all super key, and keeping these 2 guys home. And really nice job. In-state 2022 class looking very strong early as well. So I think things are definitely going in the right direction for USC right now.
Greg, adding Rajon Davis, kind of that rover like player to their defense with Prophet Brown and Julian Simon and Corey Foreman, Jay Toya. Just from your vantage point, is that the kind of personnel that you think can get USC back to what they want to be?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it always comes back to linemen, right? I think getting Corey is huge because he's so good. But I think if you're USC, and we all want to see them back on top out west, at least nationally relevant, it's O-line and D-line have been hard for all the Pac-12 schools to kind of, bring in enough talent to compete with the teams in the South and in the Big Ten. But defensively, you mentioned a lot of playmakers right there. And Rajon, for me, is a guy, we talked about him, Steve, being kind of a modern-day linebacker. He's 6'1", 215. I don't think he's a tweener, though. I think he's a guy who does everything well. He's got some pass rush ability. He's one of the best cover backers I've seen in a long time. And people can, kind of crap on 7-on-7 a little bit. But I've seen a guy playing out of 7-on-7 where he's tracking receivers down the field 30 yards, flipping his head around and making an interception that a lot of DBs can't even make. So I think this guy can run. He can cover. He's got the blitz ability. He's physical at the point of attack. He plays hard. He's super smart, coming from Mater Dei. Battle tested, played in a ton of big games. Those St. John Bosco Mater Dei games have been epic, and he always came up big in those big games. So I'm excited for him, excited for USC, schematically excited to see how they're going to use him. Sounds like he said kind of an inside backer, but not your traditional plugger, more of a, kind of a blitz cover guy coming from the inside. So a great fit for USC. I think he's a great fit in any scheme, but a great job by USC to be able to rally and keep him home.
Speaking of keeping them home, USC already has Damani Jackson committed in 2022, five-star corner, number one player at the position nationally. That was a big thing for them this year, is putting that fence around Los Angeles. Why were they so much more successful this cycle and looking ahead than they were the couple cycles before?
It'd be too simple to just say Dante Williams, but honestly, Dante was big, and he's kind of like that player you have who just plays so hard that he kind of elevates everybody around him. And they sound corny, but honestly, Dante recruits with so much relentless passion that I think it elevated the rest of the staff. And so it wasn't just Dante. You had a whole staff that was hungry. I think they were embarrassed last year for how they finished. And then honestly, I think, I've said this for years, in Southern California, kids want to go to USC, right? That's their top choice. It's almost like starting off with an A in your class. You have to give a kid a reason not to go there. And so every kid in Southern California, if they already want to go, all you got to do is recruit them heavily, win a few games, kind of show that you're going in the right direction. And it's an easy place to recruit if you put in the work. And I think that new staff worked really hard, started off 5-0. And like I said, man, I think these kids kind of fed off each other. And once one guy started to commit, you kind of saw that domino effect. And obviously, Domani is very close with Rajon. He's very close with Corey and Sierra Wright and Miller Moss. All these guys talk, and they did a great job, I think, recruiting each other. And a lot of times these recruits can sell the program better than the coaches can. So I think they all wanted to play with each other. In 2022, you mentioned Domani, a very big personality, a very active recruiter already. And he's already saying, wait until you see some of the guys we get in the 2022 class. So it should be fun to see over the next few months, next year, kind of what USC and, again, Oregon and USC kind of have a little bit of a hated rivalry already on the field and off the field. So I think both those two schools, along with Washington, hopefully UCLA can get back in there. I'm trying to pump up the Pac-12 just a little bit here. We kind of need something to get us going out west. So hopefully all these schools can kind of get it rolling a little bit.
Amen, brother. A big day for USC. Rajon Davis in the fold now. Greg Biggins, an awesome morning out there on the West Coast. We appreciate it, man.
Thanks, fellas. Nice job today.
And so, again, there's Rajon Davis, and that's the prospect profile. Steve, this is a guy, sometimes we look at the 247 Sports composite, and we look at our own in-house rankings, and sometimes there's a wide discrepancy. Rajon Davis, there's a lot of symmetry. I mean, largely the industry is what we believe, and so it matches up. It's a guy who's a 4-star, squarely inside the top 100, number 4 overall player nationally at his position, and it's a big pickup, as we just detailed.
I think with the way offense is going in college football, Rajon Davis is the kind of guy that can neutralize that. He's a guy that on first down can crash against the run. On second down, he can cover a slot downfield. On third down, you can delay, blitz him, and he can get home. He's just such a versatile player that can just rove all over your defense, and he's a guy that I think prospects that are coming behind him are guys that you'll see us rank even higher than where Rajon was slotted here.
And so as we zoom out a little bit, Steve, you were talking about Notre Dame, just to switch gears here. So good morning for USC. Notre Dame, in a normal year, an annual rival of the Trojans. The Notre Dame class, it's one that I don't think it's gotten a lot of national attention this morning because there aren't a lot of recruitments that are left to be decided that the Irish are involved here in. But Brian Kelly, the talk is always they're a good recruiter. How are they matching up with teams from the South or the West Coast that they may ultimately play, Ohio State in a playoff situation? And we're looking at the top recruits here. This is a top 10 class. As usual, they've got a wide variety geographically of talent. What stands out the most about the Irish class?
Well, Prince Colley, if you look at him right there, he's the Rajon Davis of this Notre Dame class, the guy that can come in and maybe replace your Butkus Award winner, Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoah, down the road. But hey, Notre Dame, they win their football games up front on the offensive line, and Blake Fisher, Rocco Spindler, Joe Alt and company. That's as talented an offensive line class in the country, right there alongside Alabama and Oregon. And then Notre Dame, they really needed to get some wideouts in this 2021 class to boost that room where they were lacking this year in the college football playoff. And they went out and got two guys that are real athletic and explosive in Deion Colzie and Lorenzo Styles. And I think that those are guys that Notre Dame's won with in the past. Receivers like Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool. Deion Colzie's in that body type, and he's a 6'6" high jumper. He's just extremely explosive. And Lorenzo Styles is a sub-11 guy in the 100-meter dash that could really run, and maybe he would be a terrific defensive back as well. But versatile football players in this Notre Dame class, as Prince Collie was an offensive standout for his high school. They're good at the point of attack, and we know that Notre Dame, as much as any program in the country, develops their players as well as anybody, and they maximize these recruiting classes that typically rank between 9 and 13 year in, year out, and when they come out, they're even better.
Steve, I want to ask you a little bit more about Tyler Buckner there. That's a guy they've obviously got coming in this class, top 100 dual threat quarterback. Obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious to you. I don't know if people realize that Jack Cohn has transferred from Wisconsin to Notre Dame. Irish fans do, Wisconsin fans do. If you're, a Florida State fan, maybe you don't know that. And then obviously you've got Ian Book, and so I'm very interested in looking at the Notre Dame quarterback room, because if you were to look from 50,000 feet, you may wonder, ooh, Tyler Buckner, is he going to play as a true freshman? And then maybe someone else talks to you and says, maybe he needs a little bit more seasoning. Well, from your perspective, as you looked at him, scouted him, evaluated him, ultimately participated in ranking him this year, how would you break down his odds to get on the field early in South Bend? And I saw Tyler Buckner in person at the QB Collective in the summer. He's one of the more athletic quarterbacks in this class. He's also a terrific lacrosse player. He can run. He can make things happen with his legs. He brings that element to your football team, similar to Ian Book, where he can move the chains on you that way and keep defenses guessing on what he's going to do with the football. He's a really smart player. You talk about people that have coached him up. They talk about his high football IQ and his ability to go to the chalkboard and just draw things up. He's at a high level there. I do think that he is still developing as a consistent thrower of the football, but all the tools are there for him to be an outstanding quarterback in South Bend. Really interesting there. So at the end of the year, the talk in the playoff conversation was about the mainstays, and then as usual, you had the highest G5 program. And Luke Fickell and the Cincinnati Bearcats, they were sitting there, they were in position, they played very competitively all year. Obviously, they went undefeated. They won the American Athletic Conference. Steve, National Signing Day is not a time where we normally talk about G5 programs a lot. They're normally not parked anywhere inside the top 10 or top 15. But just to kind of for a couple of minutes here, if you will, go down that road for me of how in-depth or maybe how differently you approach a class like Cincinnati's, where we're looking here and sometimes the top 20 to 22 kids in maybe a Georgia class or an Alabama class are rated higher than the highest rated kid that Cincinnati may have, but yet they're still in the same conversation at the end of the year. Well, we've ranked some of their guys as four-star recruits. The quarterback they signed last year, Evan Prater, he was in our top 100. Their difference maker at tight end this year, a local kid. He was a four-star recruit that had national offers. So we have ranked some of their Cincinnati commits as four-star guys and high three-star guys that we think should be playing at the Power 5 level. But here's the thing with Luke Fickell in Cincinnati. Had a chance to go spend some time with him on his campus before the pandemic. And my biggest takeaway in talking to him was he said every staff that he had been on beforehand, the head coach was the program's best recruiter. So that was Jim Tressel when he worked under Jim Tressel, and that was Urban Meyer when he worked under Urban Meyer. And so for him, he views at Cincinnati, I have to be the best recruiter on this staff. Now, he's got other great recruiters. Notre Dame just hired one of them, Marcus Freeman, to be their defensive coordinator. But that's a staff that puts a lot of time and emphasis and energy not only into evaluating their top targets, but what's the point of evaluating your top targets if you're not going to try as hard as you can to get them to sign? And Cincinnati doesn't take any shortcuts in that, and that's led by Luke Fickell, their best recruiter on staff. Yeah, it's Trey. This is kind of the conversation we have because any detractor to that whole G5 being involved in the playoff conversation, they are inevitably going to default their position back to, well, look at the rosters on signing day that an Alabama has or an Ohio State has versus these rosters. And that's kind of where it's kind of like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall in a sense as to try and nail someone down to just totally explain the whole picture. Well, it's not easy. because they're very uneven strengths of schedules. There are very uneven overall signing classes, and yet sort of the beauty of football is you still got to play the games 12 times a year in a normal year, plus more at the end of the day. It's not a conversation that's going away anytime soon.
I think the problem with the group of 5 is every time they have a game in which they are making a playoff statement, we have people who are questioning the motive of the other team on the field. So it's really hard for us to get a benchmark for how good Cincinnati is if we don't think Georgia was trying hard. I think Georgia was clearly playing hard in their New Year's Six bowl game this year. I think Cincinnati was a worthy opponent. What do we want from the college football playoff? Do we want the 4 best teams? Do we want 2 good games? Do we want to expand it? I don't know if the answer is getting a group of 5 team in the top 4. I think we're going to have a blowout in 1 versus 4 anyway. At some point, I'd like to see it. But at the same time, Josh and Steve, there are only a few group of 5 teams in the last several years who I'd even want to see play. One of them was Scott Frost's UCF team. The other was this past year's Cincinnati team. I think Cincinnati's going to run it back with most of their roster. I think Luke Fickell keeps coming back to Cincinnati because he's excited about what they've got. I don't ever see them getting an opportunity in the playoff until we expand it. But I think they could play as well as the number 4 team would play the number 1 team.
Josh, you and I have talked about it before. Can Cincinnati be like what Boise State was when they would beat Georgia in an early season non-conference game and then beat Oklahoma in a bowl game later? That's a team that you could have maybe legitimately said that was a group of 5 team that could have been in the playoff, what Boise State had. So can Cincinnati get to that level?
Yeah, for me personally, before we pivot back to recruiting here, it's never been about quality of teams. It's strictly about strength of schedule. Like, that's to me where the gulf is. So to quickly recap, we had Avonte Dickerson a few hours ago, live commit to Oregon. Davon Townley, a couple of hours later, I'm kind of losing track of time, he makes it official. He's headed to Penn State. And then you just saw Rajon Davis a few minutes ago with USC. So, Steve, as we kind of reset the board and we look at the biggest signings we've had this morning, we came into the day with a little bit of breaking news. We've also had a couple of unexpected swerves where maybe what we thought would be Auburn once upon a time ends up being Kentucky. So, we're getting ready to wrap up in the next few minutes. Some biggest takeaways this morning, and then we'll pivot to biggest things still to come.
Well, there was also just some breaking news now. Keon Coleman, 4-star receiver from Louisiana, he committed to Michigan State. He wants to play football and basketball for the Spartans. And earlier in this hour, Destin Hill, 4-star receiver from Louisiana, he picks Florida State. So Florida State's up to number 22 in the 247 Sports recruiting standings. So I think, that along with Avonte Dickerson solidifying Oregon as the number 1 class in the Pac-12, Davon Townley giving Penn State what I think is pound for pound the number 3 class in the Big Ten as 2 of the bigger storylines, and then Rajon Davis committing to USC as they continue to add some major difference makers on defense, I think is the story of the day so far.
Steve, I think we'll be off the air by the time it happens, but I think as we get into the early and then mid-afternoon hours, the impending announcement of Terrion Arnold, I think, is going to dominate a lot of the headline. JT Tuimoloau, no announcement today. That's going to stretch into April. And so we have got a guy who is a bona fide 5-star caliber player. We got him rated 5 stars. He's a multi-sport athlete, legit basketball, football at the college level type guy. Alabama's there, Florida's there, Georgia's there. You talked earlier on, and I'd like you to revisit it right now, how that recruitment has kind of had some ebbs and flows to it.
With JT, I think that Ohio State has been a program that's been consistently at the top. I think for JT, the important factors for him are not only maximizing his potential so he can get drafted high, but even drafted in the top 10 overall, I think is a big deal. And when you look at Larry Johnson's track record with the Bosa brothers and Chase Young, I think that's something that really stands out to JT and his family. Then you add the culture, then you add the way that Ryan Day, Larry Johnson, and even Brian Hartline has been involved on it. The connection that he has with the Ohio State staff is strong. But he sees all that at Alabama, too. He could go down to Tuscaloosa and maximize his potential there. He's actually been to Alabama before. It's been 2 years. He wants to get back to Alabama. He's never been to Ohio State. He wants to visit Ohio State at least one time before he decides. And then you got Oregon. They're still swinging. They're saving one scholarship for him. Nobody's going to come harder than Mario Cristobal in Oregon down the stretch. Obviously, Jimmy Lake and company would love to keep him in state. And USC, they got a really fine defensive class right right now. They got a spot for JT too, and they'll stick Dante Williams and Coach Vic and all those guys on JT here, as it's the last guy that these programs are going to be focused in on in 2021.
Look at that stock photo. Who could say no to that face? That's one of the best stock photos we have of any prospect committing this cycle. To shift it back now to Terrion Arnold, because that's one we are going to hear today, or at least we're scheduled to hear today. And he's going to pick again. Florida's there, Georgia's there, Alabama's been there. That's another one that's had several ebbs and flows. Steve, I know good and well, you and I have talked about him for months, and at any given point, you could have nailed people down and they could have told you it's Tide, it's Dogs, it's Gators. There have been all kinds of different perspectives. And we woke up this morning and really this is one it's kind of one of the most fun commitment type deals because it's signing day and there's still really not a whole lot of smart money on this one.
Yeah, I don't know what he's going to do. My gut coming into the day was Alabama. Alabama led in the spring. I'm confident of that. I think Florida's made it interesting. Georgia's been in the top three for a long time as well, and Kirby Smart has talked to Terrion Arnold about building the defense around him. He knows that defensive back is such a huge need in Athens, and he's good friends with Xavier Sori, who's already committed to the Bulldogs. But I think the trust with Nick Saban, the player development at the position, has put Alabama, has kept them in a terrific spot. I do think Florida's out, so I think you're down to Alabama and Georgia for Terrion Arnold, and at 4 o'clock we'll know what he's doing.
This is something that's been talked about in the last week. And I talked to you personally, and I told you I was kind of, for lack of a better term, calling BS on that. I thought I look at a guy that good, and you take him regardless. But yet, if you look at the safety talent that Florida already has committed, obviously they've been active in the transfer portal. They only give you so many scholarship spots. And this, you tell me if I'm wrong, it looks to be a situation where, I mean, Florida stood firm behind their word that we only got so many spots here, and they're full, and sorry.
Look, I think he could have went to Florida in December during the early signing period, but you look at their class, they have Donovan Mitchell out of Pennsylvania who's a top 247, Donovan McMillan, top 247 commit. They have Corey Collier from in-state, Dakota Mitchell from in-state, so they have 3 safeties committed, and so they have to allocate those roster spots for another position. Eric Gilbert in the transfer portal. And so, I mean, they may even land a 3-star recruit as a walk-on here to add to their class. So that just shows you how tight the numbers are in Gainesville.
So some big impact signees, both that have happened, and then obviously we may have some still to come. Let's just talk about those again as we wrap up here, and we'll give you a final look before we go off the air at the top classes. Again, not a lot's changed at the top. There has been some reshuffling this morning. You know, Penn State, for example, has moved up a couple of spots. Oregon just got a big-time commit, USC as well. So the biggest impact signees of this cycle, Steve, regardless, who are you going with and why?
Well, I think you start with Corey Foreman, right? I mean, he's the #1 player. Corey Foreman, he's the #1 player in the country. He brings that pass rush presence to USC that they're missing and gives them 2 elite pass rushers on the edge with Drake Jackson. I think, you know, from the height, weight, speed standpoint, he's 6'4", going to be 270, 285 pounds. He can bend, he can turn the corner, rush the passer. And when USC, they see their opponent Oregon and the difference that a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau had on the game that they played against them, Corey Foreman gives them that kind of dynamic to play opposite Drake and really be a guy that is wreaking havoc for your defense. I think Travion Henderson for Ohio State is an instant impact player for them as they try and juice up their running back room with super high talent. And they have Evan Pryor coming in too, who's a sub-11 guy in the 100-meter dash. But I just think Travion Henderson's special. If you go and look at his junior film, there wasn't better junior film across the country at any position than Travion Henderson. He would have been a top 50 safety or top 50 player as a safety. I think you watch the first 3, 4, 5 minutes of his huddle, he doesn't even get tackled. It's just to hand him the ball and a touchdown is made. He's one of the fastest players in the country. He's a 4.0 kid, so he's super high IQ. I think Travion Henderson comes in and makes a difference for Ohio State in year 1. And then Thomas Fidone, the #1 ranked tight end in the land, headed to Nebraska. chooses Nebraska over LSU, Michigan, Notre Dame, and Iowa, among others. And his skill set is just so unique. He's a guy that, even though Nebraska brings back most of their tight end room, they don't have a guy like him. And he's a guy that can even play in the slot and have him block on the edge. But I think he's going to be a difference maker for them in the vertical passing game. And they've had some key transfers. They lose a guy like Wandale Robinson. I think Thomas Fedoni is a guy that can come in and soften that blow for Scott Frost and company and be an immediate guy they can count on to make big plays for them.
You know, Steve, we were talking a lot there about USC. We've talked a lot about Ohio State. We've talked a lot about Alabama. And a lot of that conversation, rightfully so, has been around this receiver class. But yet, if you look at the 247 Sports overall player rankings, Alabama's got several guys in the top 10, but yet all of those guys are going to play either offensive line or defensive end, defensive line. So they've really stocked the cupboard very well along the lines of scrimmage. There are 2 offensive linemen ranked in the top 5 right now of the composite. They're offensive tackles. One of them is J.C. Latham. He's headed to Alabama. The other one is Tommy Brockermeyer. He's headed to Alabama. Neither one of those guys are in-state guys. Alabama's a national recruiting outfit now. Dallas Turner is in the top 10. He's out of South Florida. He's going to Alabama as a defensive end. And so as much as we're talking about the perimeter skill guys, man, they got some horses coming in up front too.
Yeah, and I think they're counting on at least one of those offensive linemen to come in and maybe give them an Evan Neal type impact in year one, and those are 2 of the more college-ready guys to do so. And Brockermeyer and J.C. Latham, and Tommy's little brother James is committed. He's the #1 center in the country. He's a pit bull at the point of attack, super tough, super smart. I know Alabama's business school had a big role in that, but Terrence Ferguson, he's kind of the guy that no one's talking about in this offensive line class, and he maybe reminds me of Jedrick Wills with the way he impacts the game on both sides of the ball on the prep level in the same way Jedrick Wills was dominant as a defensive lineman in high school. Terrence Ferguson's defensive film is impressive. He's going to come in and be a really big-time player for Alabama on the interior of their offensive line.
I think the other thing to point out is we sort of start to wrap up here. Trey, we were talking about Michigan earlier, and we're talking about top-rated classes. Ohio State far and away the top Big Ten class, but I wanted to circle back to the Wolverines there. When we were in November and we were in December, none of the talk was about Michigan's signing class. The talk was about maybe J.J. McCarthy, but outside of that, it was who's going to be the head coach at Michigan. And it wasn't, is Jim Harbaugh going to be fired? It's, is he going to go off to the NFL? And so the contract gets extended and all kind of salary restructuring, which doesn't really matter on a day like today. But yet, here we sit. So Michigan, some staff overhaul, but same head coach in place. There wasn't this rash of decommitments like some programs saw, and yet here we are. We're wrapping, putting a nice bow on the 2021 signing class. Michigan is in the top 10. They've got a nice roster. Hopefully they've got a franchise quarterback coming in, along with guys like Xavier Worthy and Donovan Edwards. I mean, who knows? Maybe we're talking about 2021 as being that pop year that we've finally been waiting for offensively for Michigan football.
We'll know pretty early on. They play Washington in week 2 in 2021 if that schedule holds. I think Jim Harbaugh has to turn it over to J.J. McCarthy. There's some belief that J.J. McCarthy is the best high school quarterback that Jim Harbaugh has signed since Andrew Luck. If you can ride that true freshman quarterback, and if he can make plays off schedule for you, maybe in the game against Ohio State, they could turn this thing around. If they fall flat on the field, I don't know what's going to happen with Jim. We'll probably be having the buyout and the who's next at Michigan talk. Matt Campbell perhaps sometime this fall. But I'm rooting for Michigan to be good. College football is better when they are.
Believe me, we all are. For various reasons, we all are. So let's take a final look at the top 5 before we get you out of here this morning. It's been a really exciting morning. We had 3 live commitments. Avonte Dickerson headed to Oregon. Davon Townley headed to Penn State. Rajon Davis staying on the West Coast. He goes to USC. And your top 5, 1 through 5, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, LSU, Clemson. Of course, the big news inside the top 5 this morning, Alabama locking up the #1 class in the 2021 rankings, but also that 325.94 overall point ranking, still with potentially guys to add, already locks Alabama in as having the highest rated class in the modern era.
Only 3 schools have an average ranking per commit of over 94 this cycle. Alabama at 94.90, Ohio State at 94.52, and that's with JT still in play for both of them. And Clemson, 94.02, generally a smaller class for Clemson year in and year out because they don't see a lot of their guys in the portal. And so another terrific Clemson class that's going to keep them in the discussion from a straight talent perspective.
And again, several more big commitments coming up. We're about to go off the air now. Keep it locked on 247sports.com as well as all the team sites. A lot of our guys are just now getting to work, and they'll be pumping content out all day long. For Steve Wiltfong, Trey Scott, myself in studio, Director Colin behind the scenes here, we've got a whole team of folks in Stamford, Connecticut that made this possible. Greg Biggins joined us, Brandon Huffman joined us, and all of our guys behind the scenes and girls behind the scenes working to make sure Twitter goes out on time and the website gets up to date. A cast of thousands. We just happen to be the faces you see on air. So thank you so much from us to everyone involved in this operation. It's been a really fun morning. We thank you most of all for joining us. This has been the 247 Sports National Signing Day Show. Take care.